Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at something we see all the time every day, but probably don't think too much about: color.
Color.
Yeah, color. We got a cool excerpt here from IELTS speaking. Colors. Someone's talking about what colors they like and dislike. Pretty simple, right?
Sounds simple,
But we're going to dig a little deeper. We're going to see how those preferences, those colors were drawn to or put off by, how that connects to things like cultural beliefs, societal norms, even our own psychology, right?
It's amazing, how much we can actually learn about ourselves and the world around us just by sort of examining our relationship with color.
Exactly. And this excerpt, right off the bat, it starts with the person saying they love red, right? And they connect that to luck, good luck in Chinese culture.
Oh, interesting.
And that got me thinking, like, how many of our own color associations are actually rooted in cultural traditions? Like, we don't even realize it.
Right. Yeah, it's a powerful connection. In China, red is deeply symbolic, right? It represents prosperity, good fortune. You see it everywhere. From those red envelopes exchanged during Lunar New Year to the vibrant red lanterns you see adorning festivals. It's woven into the fabric of everyday life there.
It really is. And it's so interesting because then the interviewee goes on to say that they dislike pink. And the reason, they think it's too girly. And that really got me thinking about, how much of this is about societal norms. It's not just personal taste, but it's like society telling us what colors are supposed to be for boys or for girls.
Absolutely. And we see this kind of thing reflected in marketing and branding all the time, right? Think about children's toys, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Pink often signifies femininity, right? While blue is associated with masculinity, and these color associations, they become so ingrained, right, that we often don't even realize how they're actually influencing our choices.
It's like we're subconsciously being like guided towards certain colors.
Yeah.
Based on these preconceived notions of what they mean.
Right.
But then the interviewee mentions that their friends all have, all kinds of different color preferences. And that reminds us that individual psychology, right, that comes into play too.
Of course, yeah. Personal experiences, individual differences, these are crucial factors. And the field of color psychology, it explores how colors actually evoke emotions, impact moods, and even influence behaviors.
Wow.
For example, a therapist might use a calming blue in their office.
Okay.
While a restaurant might use a vibrant red to try to stimulate appetite.
I've definitely noticed that. Like red, a lot of fast food places use those colors.
Absolutely.
That actually makes me think about something else the interviewee said. They prefer a dimly lit bedroom. They say it helps them sleep better. Is there actually a scientific explanation for that?
Definitely. Exposure to bright colors, particularly blue light, the blue light emitted from screens.
Oh, yeah.
That can actually disrupt our sleep-wake cycle by suppressing the production of melatonin. And melatonin is a hormone that regulates sleep.
I've heard of that.
So a dimly lit environment that encourages melatonin production, right? It promotes relaxation and better sleep.
So it's not just about liking the dark. It's actually like biology.
Exactly.
That's so cool. Switching gears a little bit here, the interviewee also mentions that they buy things based just on the color.
Oh.
They specifically say black and white clothes and stationery.
That's a great example of what we call color psychology in branding. Brands leverage our subconscious associations with colors to kind of influence our perception of their products. Black often signifies sophistication, elegance.
Right. Yeah.
Think high-end fashion brands. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas white conveys minimalism. Think Apple products, right, with their sleek, clean designs. These aren't accidental choices, right? They're strategic decisions designed to evoke specific feelings and associations.
So when I'm drawn to that black T-shirt, it's not just me. It's like Apple or some fashion designer messing with my mind.
In a way, yeah, they're tapping into those deep-seated associations.
That's amazing. It really highlights how kind of interwoven all this is, like personal preference, cultural influence, and these psychological effects. It's just fascinating how it all comes together.
It really is a fascinating interplay.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've explored how culture and psychology influence our relationship with color.
Right.
But But what about personal memories? Think about a color you have a strong reaction to, whether it's positive or negative. Is there a story or an experience behind that connection?
Yeah. Sometimes the answers can be really surprising. Taking the time to reflect on these associations, it can give us a deeper understanding of ourselves and how we interact with the world around us.
It really makes you realize how much color impacts our lives, often without us even realizing it. So keep your eyes open, and you might be surprised by what you discover about your own relationship with the whole spectrum of colors around you.
I think we all might be.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
See you next time.
It's funny when you think about it. We've all been there, right? Like needing to borrow something.
Yeah.
Or being the one someone asks,
Oh, absolutely.
It's like this universal thing, borrowing and lending.
Totally.
So today we're going to take a deep dive into all of that.
I love it.
We've got this fascinating source, someone's personal experiences, actually.
Interesting.
With the whole borrowing and lending thing. And wow, let me tell you.
Yeah.
It gets surprisingly deep.
Well, it really is amazing how such a basic everyday thing can tap into all of these social rules and psychology and even evolutionary biology when you really think about it.
No kidding. So let's jump right in. Our source starts off with this memory of trading storybooks in primary school.
Oh.
Which I totally relate to, childhood sharing, that they just go hand in hand.
Oh, for sure. There's something so fundamental about that, isn't there? It's not even really about the stuff itself, the books or toys or whatever. It's more about those early social bonds you're forming.
Yeah.
Learning about giving and taking, reciprocity, that whole thing.
Like crucial life lessons right there.
Exactly. Some might even say it goes way back, evolutionarily.
Oh. Okay.
Cooperation equals survival. Right?
Wow. Makes you think how much of that sticks with us as adults.
Yeah.
Because later on in the source, they talk about having to borrow money in college.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to.
Definitely.
But what's interesting is they talk about this feeling of vulnerability that can come with that.
Borrowing out of necessity, it changes things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's this power dynamic, even if you don't realize it. Suddenly you feel obligated, maybe even a little ashamed, depending on the situation, who you're borrowing from.
Right.
And that trust becomes so important.
Absolutely.
Being open about paying it back, communicating. It's not just about the money itself, It's about keeping that relationship healthy.
Totally. And it's not always just money, is it?
Yeah.
The source mentions being way more careful about lending out things that are really valuable.
Of course.
I'd lend you my lawnmower any day.
Right.
But my great-grandmother's necklace, no way.
Exactly. That's where it gets really fascinating, right?
Yeah.
The difference between sentimental value and practical value.
Right.
A borrowed textbook, sure, you can replace that.
You can always get another one.
But something with real personal history, emotional weight attached to it, ooh, that's a whole other story.
Totally different.
It's less about logic then, isn't it?
Yeah.
And more about how much you trust someone.
You really start weighing things then.
You do. Is it worth the risk?
Makes you wonder, is that hesitation?
Yeah.
Is that us just protecting ourselves?
Right. It's we've all been burned before.
Ugh, tell me about it.
Right. You lend something out and then nothing.
The worst. And the source actually talks about that.
Okay.
About how upset they felt when someone didn't return something.
Makes sense. There's a sense of betrayal almost.
Totally.
It can lead to arguments, mess up friendships. And make you think twice about lending anything out again.
For sure.
It really makes you wonder, is this healthy skepticism?
Good question.
Or are we just becoming less trusting as a society?
That's so true. I had this thing recently with a friend.
Uh-oh.
They borrowed a book from me, and it took them ages to give it back.
Oh, no.
And I gotta admit, I was getting kind of resentful.
I get it.
Which I felt bad about.
Yeah.
But then I realized it wasn't just about the book itself,
Right.
It was about feeling like they didn't respect my stuff.
Right.
Or our friendship even.
See, that's what I mean. It's amazing how these little things can show you what's really going on in a relationship.
Absolutely.
It makes you think about your own behavior, too.
Oh, yeah.
Are you communicating what you need? Setting boundaries?
So important.
And on the other hand, are you being considerate of the trust someone's giving you when you borrow?
Wow. It's like we started with kids swapping storybooks,
I know.
and now we're talking about trust and social contracts and
Deep stuff.
who knew borrowing and lending could be so profound.
It really is. Makes you think about your values, right?
Yeah, how you handle these situations.
Absolutely. And it makes me wonder,
Yeah.
our world's changing so fast. Are these ideas about borrowing and lending
Right.
changing with it? Are we adapting?
That's a great point. So I'm leaving you with this question, dear listener.
Ooh, I like it.
What's the one thing you'd be most hesitant to lend out?
Good one.
And what does that tell you about what you value most?
That's something to think about for sure. And hey, speaking of sharing,
Yes.
if you're into history, stick around. Next time we're going deep
I love it.
on lending libraries.
Wow. Talk about a testament to trust.
You got that right.
Can't wait.
Me neither.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive with me.
Hi,
And
everyone.
as always,
Excited to be here.
yeah, this could be a good one, I think. So we've been getting some questions and feedback about hat-wearing habits. People are kind of interested in, is it a thing, is it not a thing?
Sure.
And we've got a really interesting source that we're going to unpack today, and you might not expect this, but it comes from IELTS.
Really?
Yeah, a speaking exercise from IELTS.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. That's not what I would have thought.
no, you wouldn't think, a language test would give us insights into cultural trends, but this one does. So,
You intrigued.
yeah. So the source mentions that hat wearing isn't universally popular, and it just made me think, like, why is that?
Yeah.
What makes someone decide to wear a hat or not wear a hat?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Like, that is a fascinating question. Thinking off the top of my head, I wonder if climate plays a role.
Yeah.
And I know the source even mentions that there's different hats for summer and winter. But I also wonder, like, even outside of just like the practicalities of it, are there like social customs or religious practices at play here?
Oh, for sure. For sure. And maybe even like historical context.
Oh, absolutely.
Because different hats come in and out of style, and maybe that changes our relationship with them.
Totally. Yeah. Like what's considered cool to wear on your head has definitely evolved over the years.
100%.
Yeah.
And speaking of social customs, the source talks about buying hats in person.
Okay.
Specifically about trying hats on before you buy them.
Uh-huh.
So it seems like, that's important to them to see how it looks on them.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way? I mean, do you like to try on hats in person?
I do. I am very much a try before you buy kind of person, especially when it comes to hats.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like with a hat, it's going to fit right and it's got to,
Sit right. Yeah.
Yeah, look good with like your face, shape, your hairstyle, everything.
Right, exactly. And I mean, maybe that's even part of why hat wearing isn't as popular as it used to be.
Oh, interesting. You think so?
Yeah. I mean, everybody shops online these days.
That's true.
And, it's harder to get that feel for a hat when you're just looking at it on a screen.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, you can't really tell how the brim is going to hit your face or how the material is going to feel.
Exactly. Or, even like the color might look different in person than it does on your computer.
Absolutely. Yeah, lighting can be so deceiving online.
Totally.
Huh.
So maybe that's part of it. People just aren't trying on hats as much as they used to.
It's possible. Yeah, maybe the rise of online shopping has inadvertently led to a decline in hat wearing.
It's a theory anyway.
Okay, so getting back to the source, they also mention having like a summer hat and a winter hat.
Right.
Which, seems pretty standard, right? You want something to keep the sun off your head and you want something to keep your head warm.
Makes sense.
But I'm curious about your essential hat types.
Okay.
What are your go-to hats?
Well, I definitely agree with the source on the summer and winter hats.
Yeah.
I have like a big wide-brimmed straw hat.
Okay. For when it's sunny out, and then for winter, I love a cozy beanie.
BBs are great.
Oh, yeah. But I gotta say, I'm a big fan of baseball caps.
Oh, yeah.
That are so classic and versatile.
And easy, right? You can just throw one on and go.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
they go with like pretty much anything.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned baseball caps because it reminded me of something else from the source.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
They talked about how certain types of hats are associated with specific groups or activities.
Right.
Like they mentioned baseball caps, but also cowboy hats,
Mm-hmm.
berets.
Yeah, those are all really distinctive.
Yeah, and it's like they almost signal something about the wearer.
No, totally. It's like they become part of their identity or how they want to be seen.
Exactly. And I think that's really fascinating. Like a cowboy hat immediately conjures up a certain image.
Oh, for sure. It's like you can practically hear the country music playing.
Right. Or like a beret. You think of artists and poets and,
Yeah.
that Parisian chic.
Absolutely. It's amazing how much a simple hat can convey.
It is. It is. And, speaking of conveying things, sometimes hats can convey anxiety.
Oh, how so?
Well, the source mentioned that they sometimes avoid wearing hats because they're worried about messing up their hair.
I see.
And I got to admit, I've totally been there too.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, we've been talking about hats as these like symbols of identity and self-expression.
Right.
But sometimes practicality and comfort just have to win out.
Oh, for sure.
Like if you spend a lot of time on your hair, the last thing you want is to flatten it with a hat.
Exactly. And, it makes me wonder if there's like a cultural element to that too.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
Like how much emphasis does a culture place on perfectly styled hair versus the practicality of wearing a hat?
That's a really good question. Yeah, like are there some cultures where wearing a hat is just seen as more important or expected regardless of what it does to your hair?
Right. Or maybe there are places where people are more relaxed about their hair and they're happy to just throw on a hat whenever they need to.
Yeah, I could see that. It's like those cultures where people always wear scarves no matter the weather.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just part of their style, and they don't worry about it messing up their hair.
It's fascinating how all these little things can tie back to bigger cultural values.
It's amazing what you can learn from thinking about something as simple as a hat.
I know, right?
Yeah.
We've gone from weather and shopping habits to social symbols and even anxieties about our appearance.
That's been quite a journey.
It has, and it really highlights how hats aren't just about covering our heads.
Right.
They're a reflection of broader cultural values, individual preferences, and even, like you said, anxieties about our appearance.
Yeah, it's like a whole hidden language written on our heads.
It really is. What a fascinating deep dive.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And it leaves us with so much to think about. Like, if hats could talk, what stories would they tell? What stories would they tell about our lives, our cultures, our personalities?
That is a great question. Something to ponder for sure.
It is. So there you have it, folks.
Yeah.
Hats more than meets the eye. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of headwear.
Thanks, everyone.
And we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.
See ya.
Bye. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. We're diving deep today. And this time it's into something pretty interesting. We're going to be looking at someone's personal experiences and opinions.
Okay.
About cooking, housework, and just like how they view their living space.
I see. All right.
And all of this is coming from some interview answers. So we're getting like a real unfiltered, glimpse into daily life.
Oh, cool. What sort of caught your attention so far?
Well, this person mentioned that they're not a big fan of cooking.
Okay.
Like, at all. Like, and when they were living at home, they'd rely on their mom for meals. But even when they were living independently, they would often buy breakfast rather than cook it.
Interesting. So even when they had the freedom to make their own choices, they still opted out of cooking.
Yeah. So what do you think about that?
It could be a few things. Maybe it's about lifestyle, how busy they are, how much time they have. Convenience is a huge factor these days.
Right.
I mean, takeout and delivery are so readily available. And sometimes cooking just feels, I don't know, complicated, especially if you're not used to it.
Yeah.
So that could be part of it.
Yeah, because, I mean, there's also the cost factor, right? I mean, they specifically mentioned that buying breakfast was actually more cost effective for them.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Economics definitely play a role, The cost of groceries, especially these days, it adds up fast. And then the time it takes to actually cook something, sometimes it just makes more sense, especially if you're living alone, to eat out or just get something pre-made.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have those moments where, cooking just feels like, ugh, do I have to?
Totally.
And this kind of preference for convenience, it actually extends to how they feel about housework, too.
Yeah.
I mean, they did mention helping out a lot with chores growing up.
Okay.
Especially on weekends, like cleaning, sweeping, laundry, dishes, everything.
Right.
But these days, they don't seem too keen on those chores anymore.
I think a lot of people can relate to that, actually. It's a pretty common thing, as you get older and more independent, those chores that were once part of the family routine, well, they can start to feel more like burdens.
Yeah.
And there's actually a term for that, chore fatigue. As adults, we kind of crave more autonomy, more control over our time. So those tasks that feel obligatory, they just become less appealing.
Okay, chore fatigue.
Yeah.
So that could be why they're not as enthusiastic about housework now.
Yeah.
But here's a twist. They actually enjoy sweeping and mopping.
Really?
Dishes, though, are a hard pass.
Yeah.
Especially in winter without a dishwasher.
Huh. That's really interesting. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. but they really don't like doing dishes.
It makes you wonder, right? I mean, maybe with sweeping and mopping, there's the immediate visual results.
Yeah.
You see a clean floor, and it's just satisfying.
Right.
Like you've accomplished something.
Yeah.
Whereas dishes, it's more of a process. And especially without a dishwasher, that can be a real chore in the winter.
Right.
And that actually brings up another point. Technology,
Right.
like dishwashers. In a lot of Western countries, they're considered essential appliances. But that's not the case everywhere.
Yeah.
So, this difference in cultural norms, it can definitely play a role in how we perceive and approach certain tasks, like doing the dishes.
It's true. It makes you realize that even those little things, like what appliances you have, it can really impact your everyday life.
Absolutely.
But I will say, even though they don't love housework overall, this person did describe their home as fairly clean and tidy.
Okay.
And they really emphasized organization. So maybe it's not about doing every single chore, but more about finding a balance.
Right. It's about what works for you. I mean, cleanliness, it's subjective, right?
Yeah.
What feels tidy to one person could be messy to another. It's all about personal standards and what makes you feel comfortable in your own space.
I think that's a great point. So after going through all of this, what would you say are some key takeaways?
Well, for me, I think it highlights how much our individual experiences, our cultural backgrounds, even things like access to technology can shape how we feel about everyday tasks, like food and housework. It's a reminder that there's no one right way to do these things.
Yeah.
It's all about finding what aligns with your lifestyle and what you prioritize.
Absolutely. Whether that means embracing convenience, becoming a pro at certain chores, figuring out how to divide tasks if you live with others.
Exactly. It's all about finding what works for you.
I love that. And I think that's a great note to end on. But before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Yeah.
How do you think all these trends we've been talking about, the rise of convenience, people's changing preferences for chores, the whole shifting dynamic of domestic life, how do you think these will continue to change our relationship with food and housework in the future?
That's a great question.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time for another deep dive. All right, so we're diving deep today, folks, into childhood reading. Yeah, we've got some really interesting source material here. Someone reflecting on their early love for stories. And I think it'll really make you think about your own experiences.
Definitely.
The way we connect with stories as kids can have such a lasting impact on us.
Oh, for sure. It shapes our imagination, how we learn. It's really fascinating stuff.
And what's really striking about this particular person is the range of stories they loved. We're talking like classic Western fairy tales, the Brothers Grimm and all that. But then also Chinese myths and legends.
Wow.
I mean, talk about a diverse literary palette.
It is. It makes you wonder, what were you reading, listener, when you were a kid? Was it all, one type of story, or were you all over the place?
Yeah. What do you think about that mix from a psychological perspective? I mean, what does that say about a person?
Yeah. Well, I think it suggests, a real openness to different cultures and perspectives. I mean, think about it. Fairy tales, they're often, very European-centric.
Right.
But then you've got these Chinese myths with totally different characters, morals, ways of looking at the world.
Yeah.
Exposing yourself to that kind of variety early on, I think it can really foster empathy,
That's a great point.
It helps you step outside your own little bubble and see things from other points of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it makes me think about how this person preferred reading to being read to.
Interesting.
They really liked that solo experience with a book.
Right.
What do you think about that? Did you, listener, were you more of a read to me or read on your own kid?
Yeah, and how do you think that shapes us as learners? I mean, there's something about, getting lost in a book by yourself.
Yeah.
Creating the images in your head, setting the pace.
That's so true. And it reminds me of this study I read about from the University of Toronto. They actually found that when people read silently, there's more activity in the brain areas associated with visualization and mental imagery.
Really?
So you're basically directing your own mental movie.
Makes sense. You're so much more engaged.
Yeah, and that can lead to a deeper understanding of the story and even better memory retention. And of course, we can't forget about illustrations.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially for kids.
I mean, I remember having this old copy of Alice in Wonderland as a kid, and the illustrations were just, wow.
Yeah.
They totally brought the story to life in a way that words alone couldn't. What about you, listener? Any illustrations from your childhood books that really stuck with you?
Yeah, they can be so powerful, especially when you're young. And those images, they often spark creativity, right? I mean, take our subject here. They started writing their own short stories in Chinese class.
That's right. You know, it's funny how those creative writing assignments in school, they either fill you with dread or like total excitement.
Yeah, you either love them or hate them.
Right.
But, there's a real value there, even if you're not, going to become the next great novelist.
Oh, definitely.
Because when you write a story, you have to think about character development, plot, all these elements that require empathy. Yeah. You're putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to understand their motivations.
That's a good point.
And that's such a crucial skill, not just for writing, but for life, right?
Absolutely. So, listener, have you ever tried writing your own stories? And what did you learn from that?
It can be really revealing.
So as we wrap up, it seems like we've uncovered some pretty powerful stuff about the impact of stories. I mean, reading diverse narratives, especially as kids, can really broaden our perspectives.
Yeah. And the way we engage with stories, like whether we prefer reading solo or being read to, can also shape how we learn and process information.
Exactly. And then there's the whole creative writing piece, which can really boost empathy and those all-important imagination muscles.
Exactly. They're not just for entertainment. They're tools for growth.
Well said. And to leave you with something to think about, listener, what story from your own childhood has stayed with you all these years? And why do you think it still resonates so strongly?
That's always a reason.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
It's kind of crazy how attached we are to our phones, right? I mean, seriously, sometimes I think my phone knows me better than I do.
Right.
But today we're going to zoom out a little from our own personal tech and look at the bigger picture of how technology has changed and is changing.
Okay, sounds good.
We've got some really interesting thoughts from someone who's reflecting on their own experiences with tech. And I think a lot of it will resonate with you guys listening too.
Yeah, looking back on how things have evolved is always interesting.
Totally. So this person is talking about everything, like their daily tech habits, their opinions on the newest gadgets. And all of this is happening against this backdrop of like a huge shift from tech that just did its job to, well, the AI-powered world we're living in now.
It's amazing how fast things have changed, right? Even just thinking back a decade or so, the tech scene was so different.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of changes, the source mentions checking their phone first thing in the morning and last thing at night, which, let's be real, I think we've all been there.
Yeah, I think it's become a pretty universal habit. I mean, think about it. Our phones are at the center of so much, from keeping in touch with people and getting work done to just chilling out and watching videos and even keeping track of our health these days.
Yeah.
It's no surprise they're basically like extensions of ourselves.
You're so right. But here's the thing. The source also mentioned they've been hesitant to buy new tech lately because of the cost, and man, I get that.
Yeah.
It seems like everything has gotten so pricey.
Yeah, for sure. Tech prices have been going up for a few reasons. We've had those global chip shortages, supply chains getting messed up because of, well, unexpected stuff happening in the world, and even just the basic cost of materials going up. It all adds up.
Yeah, definitely.
And then there's this whole thing with planned obsolescence. Have you heard about that? It's where companies design products to become outdated or break down after a certain amount of time, so you're basically pushed to upgrade more often. It's a good strategy for their profits, but it can be pretty annoying as a consumer.
Oh, tell me about it. But okay, let's shift gears and talk about something a little more futuristic, all right?
Okay.
The source mentioned having their eye on the Apple Vision Pro. And honestly, those VR capabilities sound seriously cool. I've been reading about it too, and it seems pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's definitely a device that's caught a lot of attention, and for good reason. The Vision Pro is a major leap forward in augmented reality, and it has potential way beyond just entertainment. Imagine using it in education, healthcare, even in complex fields like engineering and design. The possibilities seem endless.
It's really incredible. And to me, this feels like a perfect example of that shift the source was talking about. Moving away from just function and into this world where tech is almost predicting what we need before we even know it.
Exactly. It's like how smartphones have totally transformed. They started as simple devices to make calls, and now they're like mini computers that fit in our pockets. We can do everything on them, from managing our finances to editing videos on the go. And AI has gotten so smart, it's even in our entertainment systems now, right? Think about those algorithms that suggest what to watch next based on what you've been watching. And of course, we can't forget about smart homes. Our thermostats and lights are learning our habits and adjusting automatically to what we like. It's pretty wild.
I totally see that.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, the source mentioned not being a big fan of those tiny smartwatches, and a part of me gets it. It's like, sometimes I feel like we're wearing so much technology, it's almost a bit much.
Yeah, I think whether or not someone embraces wearable tech is a very personal thing. What one person finds super convenient, another person might find kind of intrusive. Smartwatches have become pretty popular, especially for those health and fitness tracking features, but I can see how that small size could be a drawback for some people. In the end, it's about finding the right balance between all the cool stuff technology can do and just feeling comfortable, you know?
For sure. It seems like we're always trying to find that sweet spot between getting excited about the latest and greatest tech and figuring out how to actually make it a part of our lives in a way that feels, well, human.
Totally agree. So today, we've talked about this growing reliance we have on technology, how devices like the Vision Pro are pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and how AI is becoming more and more woven into our daily lives.
Yeah, and thinking about all of that, it makes you wonder, as we lean more and more on all this advanced tech, what's that going to mean for the future of, well, everything? It's definitely something to keep in mind as we navigate this exciting and sometimes a little overwhelming world of technology.
Lots to ponder, for sure.
Well, that's all the time we have for our deep dive today. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Ever notice how something super simple can totally change how you see a whole culture?
Mm-hmm.
Well, today we're going to deep dive into bikes in China.
Okay.
And get this, our source is just this short little IELTS practice dialogue.
Huh. Interesting.
But even in that tiny snippet, there's all these fascinating hints about transportation and Chinese life in general.
Yeah, for sure. Right away, they're talking about shared bikes like it's the most normal thing ever.
Right. Like they say tons of bikes and all in different colors, yellow, blue, green. It just sounds so different from what we see in, well, lots of places.
Exactly. And you know what's even cooler? China's relationship with bikes has had all these phases over the years.
Oh, yeah. So it wasn't always these colorful shared bikes everywhere.
Nope, not at all. For decades, bikes were the way to get around for millions of people.
Oh, right. I've seen pictures of those huge bike traffic jams in cities. Crazy.
Totally. So how'd they go from that to Mobike and Ofo being everywhere? It's kind of wild.
Yeah, how did that happen?
Well, think about it. Cities were growing super fast, people were getting worried about pollution, and then bam, smartphones were everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly you have these app-based bike sharing things popping up, and it's cheap, convenient, good for the environment.
Makes sense, but didn't things kind of go overboard for a while? Wasn't there a bike sharing bubble or something?
You're right. Some companies got way too big, way too fast.
Yeah.
It was they couldn't handle all the logistics, plus the money problems started piling up.
It's almost like a mini version of that whole rapid growth and gotta adjust thing that happens in China.
Yeah, exactly. So where does that leave bike sharing now? It's matured a lot.
So less chaos.
Definitely. There are fewer big companies, but the ones left seem to have figured things out.
Good for them.
And you can't deny the impact it's had on how people get around cities, especially those little trips to or from public transport.
Makes sense. But zooming out a bit, all this biking has got to be good for the environment and people's health, right?
Absolutely. We're talking way fewer emissions, cleaner air, people being more active. It's huge. But there are some downsides, too.
Oh, like what?
Well, making space for bikes, dedicated lanes and all, is still a work in progress, especially in those older cities.
Yeah.
And you got to think about parking, people stealing bikes, sometimes even vandalism. It's a challenge, for sure.
Shows you how even good ideas can have hiccups, huh?
Totally. That's why cities got to be smart about planning and adapting as they go.
It's wild how something as basic as a bike can lead to conversations about all this stuff, like how cities grow, technology, even keeping the planet healthy. It's pretty deep.
Don't forget the whole cultural side of things, too. Remember, in our source, both people learned to ride around age 7.
Oh, yeah.
That shows how biking is just part of growing up in China.
Makes you realize it's different in so many other places. It's more like a hobby or to get exercise,
Absolutely. So it makes you wonder, right? Does how we get around actually shape our values? Maybe even what we think is important.
That's a good question. So here's one last thing to think about. Imagine a world built for bikes, not cars.
Interesting.
What would our cities look like? How would we interact with nature, even with each other? It's a lot to ponder.
Definitely makes you think.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We'll see you next time. All right, everybody, welcome back. We got a really interesting deep dive to jump into today.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
Yeah, this one's all about coins and, the move towards a world without cash.
Yeah.
We got some great stuff from you guys. One that really jumped out, was this story from somebody in China who said they barely even use coins anymore.
Wow.
Which is pretty crazy to think about,
Yeah.
how quickly things are changing.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today is, this idea of, are we headed towards a cashless future?
It seems like it, especially in places like China where you've got these, huge digital payment systems like WeChat Pay and Alipay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was the thing that really jumped out at me from this person's, story. They were saying, they use that stuff for everything.
Yeah.
It's so integrated into their lives. Like buying groceries, paying for public transport.
Right.
It's just the default way to pay for things.
Well, and that's the thing, right? It's so convenient. I mean, think about how often you use contactless payments or mobile wallets yourself.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
becoming the norm, I think, in a lot of places.
Yeah, for sure.
And the technology behind it, too, is, constantly evolving. You've got near field communication,
NFC.
which powers those tap-to-pay systems. And then you've got blockchain technology, which is,
It's a whole other leather.
can of worms. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, it's so interesting to think about, going back to this person in China.
Yeah.
They were talking about how when they were a kid, they used to get a small allowance in coins. And, today kids in China are probably not even.
Yeah, they might not even know what to do with the coins.
Yeah, what even is this?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's are kids growing up without, ever even handling physical money?
Right.
What's that going to do? I mean, is
Yeah,
that
and you think about that.
going to change their relationship with money? Yeah, I mean, is it going to, affect how they think about budgeting or the effort that goes into actually earning money?
Yeah.
I mean, when you hand over a physical $5 bill for a toy
Yeah.
versus just, tapping your phone,
Yeah.
it feels different.
Right. It's a different
Yeah, there's a different weight to it.
psychological weight to it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, if we do end up moving completely away from cash,
Right.
are we losing something? Is there
Yeah.
something valuable that we're leaving behind?
It made me think about the history of physical currency, too,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, for centuries, coins have been the central part of societies, Their designs reflect all these cultural values,
Yes.
rulers and artistic styles.
Like little pieces of history, right?
Yeah,
When you're-
exactly. And it's kind of other objects that have sort of faded away with the, technological advancements.
Yeah.
Think about the abacus.
Yeah.
Right. That was this essential tool.
Used to be
Okay.
essential for calculations.
Right. And now it's a museum piece.
Yeah. Although, that makes me think about vinyl records.
Oh, interesting.
Those were almost totally replaced by CDs.
Right. Right.
But now they're
Yeah, they're making a comeback.
making a huge comeback.
That's true.
So, maybe some things go through cycles.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe cash will make a comeback too.
Maybe. Who knows? It's hard to say.
Who knows? Yeah.
But I think, regardless of whether cash makes a comeback or not, this
Yeah.
whole idea of, this person's experience with coins or the lack thereof, it really highlights this larger trend.
This global shift.
Yeah, that's happening all over the place.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think, what happens to our relationship with money if it becomes purely digital?
Yeah. That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're not, carrying around physical cash anymore,
Right.
will we value it differently?
Yeah.
Will we be more likely to spend it or less likely to spend it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
It's a really interesting thing to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
A lot to ponder.
Yeah, a lot to ponder.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah.
So thanks, everybody, for joining us for this
Yeah, this was a good one.
deep dive into, coins and the future of money.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And we'll see you next time.
See you later.
All right.
Ever imagine yourself navigating a city that's just bustling with life? Like a symphony of car horns and, the sound of hurried footsteps all around you.
Yeah. Can't say that I'm a huge fan of car horns, but I get it. Sometimes they're
Necessary, right.
totally. Sometimes they are.
Well, that's what we're diving into today.
Uh.
A firsthand account of someone trying to navigate city life. And it's really interesting because they talk about these almost perfect roads,
Yeah.
but then this crazy wild experience of trying to just cross the street.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? You would think that nice, smooth, well-maintained roads would just naturally mean smooth traffic flow, right?
Right.
But this account really highlights what's often overlooked, which is human behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, infrastructure, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's like this contradiction almost like on the one hand, these pristine roads, but then you've got like this constant soundtrack of car horns honking and people shouting. It's like, is this a cultural thing? Or are there just certain cities where people are just more expressive,
Yeah.
when they're behind the wheel? It's like, what's going on?
I think it's multifaceted. It's a lot of factors at play. Take Hefei, for example.
In China, right?
Yes, in China, the city that our source is describing, it's rapidly developing, right? And rapid development usually means a huge influx of people and vehicles in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And that puts a strain on the existing infrastructure. And it can also lead to this clash of driving styles, people coming from different places with different expectations, and they're all trying to figure out how to navigate this new city together.
Yeah. So is Hefei like a unique case? Is this just specific to Hefei, or do other quickly developing cities around the world share this same kind of experience? Like, is it common to run into this like pedestrian obstacle course in other cities?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely not unique to Hefei. You see this pattern in cities going through rapid urbanization all over the globe. One that comes to mind is Lagos, Nigeria.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. The amount of people and cars trying to get around each day is staggering, and it makes crossing the street quite the adventure. And, it's not just limited to developing cities either.
Interesting.
Even in a place like New York City, well-established infrastructure, and
right.
Jaywalking is still a common thing. And just getting through those busy intersections, sometimes it can feel like playing a real-life game of Frogger,
Totally. And it makes you think about all those near misses you've probably had and never even realized, right?
Exactly.
So okay, we've talked about infrastructure, but how much of this just boils down to human psychology? Have there been studies on why people just can't resist the urge to jaywalk, even when it's clearly dangerous?
Oh, there's a ton of research actually on the psychology of traffic violations. Some studies show that people actually go through this risk assessment process. They're weighing the risk of getting caught against the perceived reward of saving a little time.
Yeah.
Others point to social norms and conformity. If everyone else is doing it, it feels less risky, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then there's this illusion of control where pedestrians often misjudge the speed and distance of oncoming traffic.
Wow. It's like a whole mental calculation going on there, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just about impatience or recklessness. There's actual cognitive processes happening there. But then the question is how do you design a city that takes all of that into account?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, our source talks about the need for better education and making people more aware of traffic rules. Do you think that's enough?
Education is key for sure. It's like the foundation, public awareness campaigns. Those can be really effective in shifting social norms and encouraging safer behavior. But you also need to think about designing cities in a way that makes it easier for people to actually follow the rules. Things like clear signage, pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, wider sidewalks, clearly marked crosswalks, things like that. Even things like speed bumps, and narrower lanes. These traffic calming measures, when you combine those design elements with good education, that's when you start to see real progress in terms of pedestrian safety and traffic flow.
Right. So it's not just about telling people what to do. It's about making the right choice, the easiest choice.
Exactly. Make it intuitive,
Yeah.
And it goes beyond the physical stuff, too. Think about the role of technology, like smart traffic lights that adapt to pedestrian flow, apps that give you real-time traffic updates, even driverless cars. All of these things could play a role in shaping the future of our cities and how we move through them.
It's amazing to think about just how many different factors contribute to a city's overall flow. It really shows the interconnectedness of design, human behavior, and technology.
Absolutely. And that interconnectedness, it's only going to get more complex as cities keep growing and changing. So here's something to think about, knowing what we've talked about today about these challenges in urban design. What would be your top priorities if you had to design a city of the future? One that's not just efficient, but also safe, enjoyable, and maybe even a little easier on the ears, a little less honking.
Yeah, well, more peace and quiet would be nice.
Right.
Some food for thought there for everyone listening. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.
See you then.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Yes, welcome back.
This time, we're going fishing.
We are.
But not literally, of course.
Yeah.
We'll be staying on dry land today as we wade into the world of fishing in China.
That's right.
And just so everyone knows, we're casting our lines into this really interesting excerpt from a English language learning resource, believe it or not.
Yeah, for the IELTS exam.
Yeah, so that's kind of our bait, if you will.
Yeah.
But the real catch here is the chance to like really dive into Chinese culture and perspectives on fishing.
Absolutely.
All, viewed through this unique lens of language learning.
I think it's fascinating how something like fishing can be a window into a whole culture.
Right.
Yeah, and we often think about, language as just a way to communicate.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that. It's like this whole system of, beliefs and values and perspectives.
Totally. It's like embedded right there in the words, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So the first thing that kind of jumped out at me in this excerpt was that fishing in China, it's not like, a national pastime or anything.
Right, it's not like baseball in America.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a niche hobby.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to remember that even a small percentage of a population as massive as China's, we're talking about a huge number of people.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, it might not be as universally popular as, say, basketball, but it's still a significant part of the culture.
Makes sense.
It's kind of like fly fishing in the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
It's not for everyone.
Right.
But
yeah.
there's a whole community of people who are really passionate about it.
Totally. And that actually reminds me of something else the speaker mentioned about not really enjoying eating fish all that much.
Oh, right, because of the bones.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can relate to that a little bit, I mean, I like fish well enough, but I'm not a huge fan of having to, like, pick around bones all the time.
Yeah, I get that it's definitely a different culinary tradition, but it's not just about the bones,
What do you mean?
Well, in Chinese cuisine, the whole fish, head to tail, it's seen as, like, essential for the flavor and the balance of the dish.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's like a different philosophy.
So it's not just about practicality, it's about, like, symbolism or something?
Exactly. Yeah, it's about respecting the whole animal and using every part of it.
Wow. I never thought about it like that before.
Yeah, and there are so many different ways to prepare fish in China, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like steaming, braising, deep frying.
Oh, yeah.
But that respect for the whole fish, it's kind of a consistent theme.
Okay, I'm starting to see a little differently now.
Good.
But I'm still team filet all the way,
Hey, no judgment here. Everyone has their preferences.
Exactly.
And it's those preferences that make us unique.
Well said.
So, speaking of personal preferences, the speaker in this excerpt also mentioned that they weren't all that into fishing themselves.
Really?
Yeah, they said they just didn't have the patience or the skills for it.
I can relate to that. I mean, I've tried fishing a few times, and it just never really clicked for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill that takes time and practice to develop.
Right. But here's the thing, though, right? The speaker's lack of enthusiasm for fishing, it actually kind of highlights a really interesting aspect of Chinese culture.
Oh, how so?
Well, they talk about fishing being seen as this, like, contemplative, almost meditative activity.
Right.
It's not about reeling in the biggest catch.
Yeah.
It's more about the process, the connection with nature.
Yeah, the opportunity for reflection.
Right.
Yeah, it's a really different mindset from the kind of competitive fishing that you often see in the West.
I mean, I'm picturing like a serene landscape, with like mountains and water and like a lone figure fishing by the shore.
It's a beautiful image, right?
It is.
And it really captures the essence of fishing in Chinese culture.
It's like that whole idea of finding harmony with nature.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very Taoist concept.
Oh, right. I've heard of Taoism.
Yeah, it's a philosophy that emphasizes living in balance with the natural world.
And so fishing is kind of like a way to connect with that philosophy.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's pretty deep.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
And it's not just a modern idea either.
Really?
Yeah, like think about ancient Chinese paintings.
Okay.
You often see depictions of scholars fishing by tranquil lakes.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not just there to catch fish,
Right.
They're there to contemplate life's mysteries, to find inspiration in nature.
So fishing is like a metaphor for something deeper.
Exactly.
Wow, I'm learning so much today.
Me too.
So I've gone from talking about, not liking fish bones
Yeah.
to like ancient Chinese philosophy, all because of fishing.
It's amazing, right?
It is.
How this one simple activity can connect to so many different aspects of a culture.
And I think it also highlights the importance of like personal experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Because even though the speaker in the excerpt didn't love fishing themselves,
Oh, right.
they still had these fond memories of fishing with their family when they were younger.
Yeah, they talked about going fishing with their father and brother.
And it was clear that those memories held a really special place in their heart.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks to another important aspect of Chinese culture, right? Family.
Yes, absolutely.
Like spending time together, sharing activities like fishing. It's a way to strengthen those family bonds.
And to pass on traditions, to create a shared history.
That's so beautiful.
It is, isn't it?
So I guess what we're saying is that fishing in China, it's not just about catching fish.
No, not at all.
It's about connecting with nature, contemplating life's big questions, and spending quality time with loved ones.
Exactly.
Wow, who knew there was so much to learn about fishing?
Right. And we just scratched the surface here.
I know. I'm already thinking about all the other everyday activities that we take for granted and how they might hold deeper meanings in different cultures.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it?
It is. It is.
So to our listeners out there, we challenge you to think about the seemingly ordinary activities in your own culture.
And ask yourselves what deeper meanings they might hold for someone from a different background.
What a great question to ponder.
I think so, too.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
But the exploration doesn't have to stop here.
No, keep those minds curious.
Absolutely. Until next time, everyone happy exploring.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
We've all had them right. Those teachers that just stick with you.
Yeah.
Good or bad.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, today we're going to do a deep dive on this. Looking at one person's memories, actually, of the different teachers they've had. And it's not even like a ranking thing of like who was best or worst.
Right.
It's more like, how did each of these people kind of make a mark at different points in their life? Almost like they were all these little puzzle pieces that fit together somehow.
I like that analogy. Yeah.
To get to where they are now.
Interesting.
So right away, something that jumped out at me is that they mentioned a bunch of their instructors from their master's degree. Not just like one rock star prof, but like a whole crew. What does that tell you?
Well, to me, that's a good sign already. It shows that they're not looking for like a one-size-fits-all kind of teaching. They appreciate that there's different approaches and different personalities even, and they can all bring something valuable.
Yeah. It's almost like they're saying good teaching isn't just one thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's this one person they specifically call out as a mentor.
Interesting.
So not even just teacher, but mentor.
Yeah.
What's the difference in your mind?
Well, a mentor's like a step beyond, right? I mean, they are teaching you stuff, but it's also about like guiding you through the whole learning process itself, not just the content. Imagine it like this. You're trying to learn some new skill.
Yeah.
Could be anything. Coding, cooking.
Podcasting even.
There you go. Podcasting. A mentor wouldn't just be like, here are the steps, now go do it.
Right.
They'd be there with you figuring out, okay, how do you break this down?
Yeah.
Where are you getting stuck? How do we troubleshoot that? And also celebrating like, hey, you're making progress.
It's like that extra layer of support.
Total.
Which makes sense because this person talks about really struggling with essay writing during their master's.
Oh, I can relate.
Come on. Who hasn't hit that information overload wall at some point?
Yeah.
Especially at that level.
Especially at that level. I mean, you're in a master's program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be like the expert already almost.
And yet there's always more to learn. But that's where that mentor comes in, right? They help them break down those huge, scary essays into bite-sized pieces.
That's such a good skill, too. Like for anybody, not even just for grad school.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
It's all about planning, prioritizing, figuring out what's the core message here I'm trying to get across. Whether you're writing or presenting or even just like explaining something to a coworker.
Oh, yeah.
It applies everywhere.
Okay, so then we jump ahead. This person's in university now, and another teacher pops up who was really supportive during something they call placements.
Placements.
Now, for those of us not in the education world, what would that even be?
That's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? But knowing that they did end up going into teaching, we can make some guesses. Maybe it was going into actual classrooms and observing other teachers.
Oh, shadowing.
Shadowing, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even leading some lessons for the first time. Yikes.
That's nerve-wracking.
I know. Maybe working with kids in like an after-school program or something.
More of a volunteer kind of thing.
Could be. But any of those are pretty scary for someone just starting out in the field.
Oh, for sure. So no wonder that teacher made a lasting impression.
It's always those people who are there for you when you're like, is this even for me?
Yes.
Am I going to make it?
The ones that believe in you.
Exactly.
Okay. But funny side note, this person barely remembers their elementary school teachers.
Really? I guess that happens.
I mean, come on. It's been a while for most of us. Life gets in the way.
True. But doesn't that make you wonder, though, do those early teachers matter, even if we don't remember specifics?
Yeah, good point.
Like maybe they shaped our whole attitude towards learning without us even realizing it.
Maybe they made us hate school.
Ooh, that's a whole other deep dive right there.
Right. But it also makes you think, if you are an elementary school teacher,
Yeah.
you might be laying the groundwork for how some kid feels about learning,
Yeah.
like their whole life.
That's a heavy thought, right?
Heavy responsibility. Okay, drum roll, please. Big reveal time. This person is on the path to becoming a teacher themselves.
No way.
They got the teaching degree, they got the master's in education.
Wow. It all makes sense now.
It all connects.
All those teachers in their life.
And get this, the way they talk about it.
Yeah.
They say, teaching is my life's work. That's not just a job title.
That's a commitment.
So do you think all those amazing teachers they had kind of inspired them?
Maybe they saw how much of an impact a teacher can have and thought, that's what I want to do too. Pass it on.
It's like the good kind of contagious.
Totally. And it's not like they're going in blind. They know it's not easy.
Yeah, they've seen the tough side.
But they're still choosing it. It's powerful.
So we started with someone being taught, and now they're going to be the teacher.
Full circle. Makes you wonder, though.
What kind of teacher will they be?
Will they be like that mentor they had? Or the one who helped them through those tough placements?
Or maybe they'll even end up being somebody's favorite teacher.
Someone we do a deep dive on in 20 years. Who knows? But that's something for you listening to think about, too. Who are those teachers who really made a difference for you? And why?
Yeah, what made them so special? We all have those people in our past.
It's worth thinking about.
Because it shapes who we become, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
My pleasure.
Okay, so today we're going like full-on deep dive mode into something, you sent over.
Okay.
And I got to say it really caught my eye.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it was those little snippets you pulled from like an IELTS speaking guide.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know what you're thinking right now, like English language learning.
Right.
But trust me on this one, because these little excerpts, they're like these hidden gems about how we work best, how we study best.
Yeah, it's really interesting how sometimes these materials that you wouldn't think are related can like teach us about these universal things, like how to be productive or, where to work.
Exactly. And it's funny because this speaker, the one from the guide,
right,
they're all about studying at home. Like they prefer it, but then they admit that they're way more productive at the library.
Yeah.
It's like this constant battle between comfort and focus.
Right. Have you ever felt that?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Like my couch is calling, but my to-do list is judging.
It's a classic dilemma, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like home, it's our safe space, our comfy zone.
Exactly.
But then it's also like a magnet for distraction.
Right. Every little thing.
Exactly. And then you've got the library, this place of structure.
Yeah.
Quiet atmosphere.
It's like a haven for concentration.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting because it all ties into environmental psychology.
Okay, I'm listening.
So it's this whole field about how our surroundings actually shape our behavior.
Wow.
Like there are studies that show just having a plant in your workspace can make you focus better.
Really, just a plant?
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right?
That's amazing. Have you noticed any environmental factors that affect your focus?
Oh, for sure. For me, it's natural light. Like if I don't have enough natural light.
Me too. I'm all about that natural light.
It's like my mood just tanks.
Absolutely. It's like instant energy.
Right.
But you know what else caught my eye in the guide?
What's that?
The speaker mentions they're a teacher and they can't work from home.
Oh.
It got me thinking about this whole remote work trend and how it really affects different personalities,
That's a really good point because while the guide highlights the library as the super productive space,
right,
it's important to remember that the ideal environment, it's like totally personal.
Yeah.
Like for some people, remote work is a game changer. Like it just clicks for them.
Right.
But for others, they need that structured office environment, to really thrive.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the guide, the speaker says their productivity takes a nosedive when they're working in groups.
Yeah.
They're like a solo work superstar.
Seems like it.
So I'm curious, what about you? Do you lean more towards solo work or are you a collaboration kind of person?
Honestly, I think the key here is self-awareness,
Okay.
Like understanding what works for you. Like, do you get energized by brainstorming with others?
Right.
Or do you need those deep dive solo sessions to really get in the zone?
That's a good question.
Because once you figure that out, you can create the perfect environment for yourself. And that might not be a typical office or a library,
Right.
Maybe it's a buzzing coffee shop or a quiet corner in a co-working space.
Yeah.
The point is to experiment and find what truly works for you.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground today thanks to these IELTS snippets.
Yeah, we have.
We talked about that push and pull between comfort and focus, how our environment really affects our productivity.
Absolutely.
And the importance of knowing our own work style. Are we team players or are we solo stars?
It's all about knowing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But before we wrap things up,
Okay.
I want to leave you with one final thought now that you've heard all of this. What one change could you make to your work or study space to boost your focus and get those productive juices flowing?
That's a great question to think about.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time, happy working.
And study.
All right, so you ready to dive in? Today, it's all about perfume.
Yeah, should be interesting.
We've got these thoughts from someone about how they use perfume.
Okay, cool.
And I think you'll find it pretty insightful to hear their unique perspective on it.
Yeah.
So this deep dive is really going beyond just, the surface of perfume, like just the brands and the scents. We're going to get into like the why behind it,
Yeah, I like that. It's like,
why do people make the choices they do?
Yeah. Why do we gravitate towards certain things? And then, like, what does that say about us? Like, that's always a fascinating question to me.
So this person, they said at first they used to think that perfume was just for girls.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think
it's a pretty common perception.
It is, yeah. Especially, growing up, there are these very traditional ideas about what's for boys and what's for girls.
Right.
And perfume definitely falls into that, like, feminine category typically.
But what I thought was really interesting is that they completely changed their mind about that. So how do you think that happens? Like, how do you go from perfume is not for me to actually, like, embracing it?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to personal experiences.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, social feedback, too.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because for this person, the turning point was actually when they started getting compliments from their students.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And I was like, that is so interesting. So, like, you might think you have a perception of something.
Right.
But then, like, other people's reactions can really change your mind.
Totally. I mean, it's like if people are responding positively to something you're doing, or, like, in this case, wearing, then you're more likely to, I guess, continue doing it and see it in a new light,
Totally. So now it's not an everyday thing for them. It's more like they'll wear perfume for a special occasion.
Oh.
Or, like, if they have, like, an important meeting at work.
Okay.
Something like that.
Gotcha.
Do you wear perfume daily or do you save it for special events?
I think it depends. Sometimes, like, even on just regular days, I feel like a little spritz of something can just kind of boost my own confidence,
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I definitely get, like, wanting to save it for those times when you really want to make an impact,
Yes. And then there was this little detail. I found it so intriguing. They spray perfume in their bedroom.
Oh, really?
Just to create a positive mood.
Wow.
It's not even about wearing it.
Right. It's about the scent itself.
It's about the scent itself.
Interesting.
Yeah, impacting their environment.
Yeah. I mean, that's really using fragrance to, like, curate the whole atmosphere.
Yes.
I mean, that's next level for sure.
It's like a personal ritual almost, right?
Yeah, totally. Like, using scent to, like, shape your space and your mood.
Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah.
So speaking of being deliberate, they talk about how they apply perfume strategically on their pulse points, like their wrists, their neck.
Okay.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally. Like, pulse points are where your blood vessels are closest to the skin, and so they generate a little bit more heat that helps the fragrance diffuse better. So it's like a little bit of science behind that,
So like a little hack.
Exactly.
A little perfume hack.
Yeah.
Then they mentioned this, which I thought was so interesting, that they've actually gifted perfume to their best friend, John.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. And I thought
that's really cool.
That was so cool.
Yeah.
And it kind of like made me think about, we had this idea that perfume is like a very feminine gift.
Right.
But why?
Yeah. I mean, why not? I think choosing a fragrance for someone, regardless of gender, is such a thoughtful gift. It shows you, you really understand them. Like their personality, their, what kind of scents they might like.
Have you ever received a fragrance as a gift?
I have, yeah. It was actually a scent that reminded the giver of like a shared memory that we had.
Oh,
So
no.
it's like,
That's so special.
yeah, it was really, really special. Yeah.
That is so nice.
Yeah.
This person also said that they preferred to just invest in one really good quality bottle of perfume that lasts rather than having like a bunch of cheaper options.
Yeah, I can see that. It's
Quality over quantity.
totally, totally. It's like appreciating the craftsmanship of a really well-made perfume.
Yes.
You know, not just chasing friends or like whatever's, you know, the cheapest option.
So I think we've really uncovered a lot about perfume just from these insights. I mean, it's so clear that personal preferences, social cues, even gift giving, it all plays a role in how someone thinks about and uses perfume.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it reminds us that fragrance is so much more than just a smell. You know, it's a way to express yourself. It's a way to kind of set the mood.
Right.
It can even be like a really meaningful way to connect with other people.
I love that.
Yeah. So like thinking about this, how does scent influence your life? What does your fragrance or maybe lack of fragrance say about you?
That is a great question. Something for everyone to think about.
Yeah, something to ponder.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dives. We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Ever get that feeling, you know, like you're kind of boxed in? Like even when you're in a big city with all the space and everything, you can still feel confined.
Right.
We're going to dive into that today.
Okay.
Explore how different people experience and describe their favorite places.
Oh.
And how those places make them feel.
Interesting.
Our source material, well, it's a guide, actually, about, you know, describing views, favorite places.
Okay.
It's the kind of thing you might use for language learning, but honestly, it gets into some pretty deep psychology of place.
I see, yeah.
And the contrast between our first two speakers is striking. One feels totally trapped in their urban apartment, while the other is just awestruck by nature.
That feeling of confinement, though, I mean, that's a fascinating place to start, isn't it?
For sure, for sure.
I mean, it's something we can all relate to, in a way.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you know, an actual physical space or even, like, a mental state.
Right, exactly. And our first speaker, they live on the 17th floor of an apartment building.
Wow.
Surrounded by other buildings. You'd think the view would be amazing?
You'd think so, yeah.
But they describe feeling confined and stuck in a small space. It really makes you think about how much our physical environment can actually impact our well-being.
There's a lot of research on this, believe it or not.
Is there really?
Yeah, yeah. Studies have shown that people living in dense urban environments, especially without like access to green spaces, they report higher levels of stress and anxiety.
Interesting.
It's almost like our brains are craving that sense of openness, that connection to nature.
Which brings us to our next speaker.
Okay.
And their experience is completely different.
Oh.
Yeah. They describe visiting this forest. It's full of these towering redwoods in Australia.
Wow.
They said it was unforgettable, amazing, impressive.
Those are pretty strong words.
They are right. Words like grandeur really jump out at you.
Yeah.
I wonder if that feeling of awe, you know, could it be an antidote to the confinement our first speaker felt?
It's possible. It's possible. Think about the whole concept of biophilia. Have you heard of that?
I've heard the term, yeah.
So it's the idea that humans, we have this like innate connection to nature.
Okay.
We're actually wired to respond positively to natural landscapes.
Interesting.
Studies have shown, and this is pretty amazing, exposure to nature can lower blood pressure.
Really?
Reduce stress hormones.
Wow.
And even boost creativity.
It's like a magic pill.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's like our nervous systems just relax when we're surrounded by trees, you know, open sky, natural beauty.
It makes you think about why we're constantly taking photos of beautiful views.
Right.
Almost like, are we trying to bottle that feeling?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's this urge to both capture the memory and share the experience, you know? I mean, think about it. Even before social media and everything, people were expressing that sense of awe through, you know, art, music, writing.
It's timeless.
It is. It really speaks to how deeply these experiences affect us.
Okay, now I want to shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Talk about our speaker's favorite place. Swan Lake.
Okay, Swan Lake.
They describe it as this oasis of greenery, right? With a 5-kilometer path that's just perfect for running.
Oh, wow.
It sounds like the ideal spot to unwind and exercise, get the best of both worlds.
What's interesting is they describe this place as having like a personal significance.
Okay.
And that, that often goes beyond just the physical, stuff.
Right.
Favorite places, they become intertwined with our memories, emotions,
Yeah.
even the people we associate with them.
That's true. I bet our speaker who felt confined in their apartment, they would find a sense of peace and openness in Swan Lake.
I bet so, yeah.
It's almost like different places can fulfill different needs that we have.
Absolutely. Think about the places you feel most comfortable.
Yeah.
Most yourself. Those places often become anchors for our well-being.
That's a great way to put it.
They provide a sense of belonging, comfort,
Yeah.
even inspiration.
So we've seen how views and places can have a profound impact on us.
It really do.
From the stress of urban confinement to the, awe-inspiring power of nature.
Yeah.
And then the personal significance of our favorite spots.
Yes.
It's clear that our surroundings really shape our experiences.
We're not just passive observers, though.
Right.
We bring our own memories, emotions, interpretations to these places.
Yeah.
And that creates this unique and personal connection.
Here's something to think about.
Okay.
What kind of view or place makes you feel most alive, most connected?
Oh.
What is it about that place that makes it so special? Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's a bustling city street or a quiet forest path, whatever it is. Just take a moment to appreciate those places that resonate with you. It's fascinating how our experiences of the world can be so diverse, yet equally powerful.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.
All right. Welcome in, everyone. Kicking off another deep dive. And this time we're looking at something I think a lot of us have thought about quite a bit.
Yeah.
Teamwork.
Definitely.
You sent over some really interesting thoughts on this, and I know you've been looking at this IELTS speaking. Perspectives on teamwork. So some really good stuff in there. And it seems like, we've all got our own opinions about teamwork and how it works or doesn't work.
Absolutely.
And some of us avoid it at all costs.
Right.
I think you're somewhere kind of in the middle from what you sent over.
Yeah, I'd say so for sure.
So you said, and this is really interesting to me, you said you're actually more productive when you work by yourself.
Yeah. I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
Like the idea of teamwork sounds great, in theory.
Yeah.
But then when you try to get a bunch of people together, to actually get something done, sometimes it's just a lot easier and faster to do it yourself.
Well, and this is so interesting because you mentioned your experience with group projects in university.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think all of us have war stories from.
It is.
And you said it was all right, but not amazing.
Yeah, it was kind of like, I always had that one person who'd kind of take charge and organize everything.
Absolutely.
Which was good. But then there are always a couple of people who didn't really contribute as much.
Yeah.
And, you'd end up picking up the slack, which was frustrating.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. And you just want to shake them sometimes and be like, hey, get in the game here.
Exactly. And it's like they're always coming up with excuses.
Right. Like, oh, my dog ate my textbook, or my wifey's been out all week.
Oh, yeah, the classic excuse.
Every time.
Yeah.
But it seems like for you, the real kind of heart of the issue is fairness.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you contribute more than others.
Right.
It makes sense that you'd feel resentful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it makes you question, the whole point of being in a team.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm really curious about is is it always unfair?
Okay.
Are there situations where it's okay for people to contribute differently?
Right.
And if so, how do we make sure that everyone feels valued, even if they're not all doing the same amount of work?
That's a really great point and a great question. And I think that's something for everyone to think about because we've all been in these situations.
Right.
So yeah, it really seems like for you, efficiency and fairness are super important.
Absolutely.
Which make total sense.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, for you listening out there, what do you think? What would a truly fair and balanced team look like to you?
Yeah. What would make you feel valued and motivated to contribute your best work?
Awesome questions to ponder. And yeah, we're going to leave you with those thoughts today.
Definitely.
So thanks for diving deep with us.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time. All right. So you want to know more about making new friends? Huh?
Yeah.
Well, it seems like a lot of you out there are curious. about this whole idea of how to make new friends.
Yeah, for sure.
We got some really interesting insights from someone who's right in the thick of it, like actually going through that whole process right now.
It's so true.
So let's dive in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so one of the first things that jumped out at me from what you shared was that this person really seems to value their friendships.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they don't necessarily see themselves as like a super, quote-unquote, sociable person.
Right.
So, I mean, how do we even define sociable, right?
That's such a good question, right? Because I think about it even for myself, like, what does it actually mean to be sociable? Is it about the number of friends you have?
Right.
Or is it more about, like, the quality of those
Oh,
connections?
for sure, the depth.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think this person's story really makes us think about that.
Yeah, and they talk about how growing up they had a pretty close group of friends.
Yeah.
Mostly from school and, their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if, those early experiences kind of shapes their approach to making friends now as adults.
It makes me think about how those first friendships we have as kids can almost be like a blueprint for how we connect later on.
Oh, totally.
Like if your childhood was full of those close-knit connections,
yeah.
maybe you're not as drawn to like huge social circles.
Right.
Maybe you're more focused on finding a few really solid people you genuinely connect with.
Exactly.
I mean, think about your own childhood. Like,
Yeah.
do you think those early friendships had an impact on how you make friends now?
That's a really good question. I think maybe it has. I'd have to think more about that. But let's get back to what our source was saying, because they talked about how they met some of their new friends through like book sharing events and English corners.
Yeah.
Which are not exactly like the typical spots you think of for meeting new people.
Not really. It's not like the bar scene or anything.
Right, exactly.
But I think that actually highlights something really important, which is the power of shared interests. For sure. When you're already passionate about something and you meet someone who shares that passion,
Yeah.
it's almost like this instant connection.
Totally. It's like you have that common ground already established.
Exactly. And what really struck me was how they talked about all the different things they discussed with their new friends.
Oh, yeah. They mentioned.
It was everything from news and cars to fashion and even like their dreams and relationships.
It's a wide range, right?
It wasn't just about books at all. It was about life.
Totally.
And I think that speaks to the potential depth of these friendships.
Yeah.
It's not just about having someone to chat with about one specific thing.
Mm.
It's about finding people you can really open up to about all sorts of things.
Right.
That's where the real connection comes in.
For sure.
That kind of connection is so valuable.
Absolutely. But here's the thing that really got me thinking. They mentioned that they're not actually that keen on meeting new people.
Really?
Even though they really enjoy the conversations once they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but I totally relate to that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Sometimes it's not about disliking people.
Right.
It's more about the energy it takes to put yourself out there.
Yeah, it can be exhausting.
Right.
But, maybe we need to rethink what it means to be sociable.
Oh.
Maybe it's not just about like being the life of the party or always seeking out crowds.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more about being open to genuine interaction,
Right.
even in smaller ways.
Oh.
Like even just a simple conversation with a barista or a deeper chat with a coworker you haven't really connected with before.
Right.
Those little moments can matter.
You're totally right. It doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming thing.
Exactly. It's about those small steps.
Small steps.
That can sometimes lead to the biggest connections.
Okay, so I guess what we're learning here is that making new friends is really about finding what works for you.
I think so.
There's no one right way to do it.
Absolutely. So as you continue on your own journey of making new connections, here's something to think about. What's one small step you could take this week that feels comfortable and authentic for you? Maybe it's joining a group that aligns with your hobbies.
Okay.
Or maybe it's just striking up a conversation with someone you see often but haven't really connected with yet.
Yeah.
You never know where those initial sparks might lead.
So true.
So be open to those possibilities.
That's great advice.
Thanks. I think so.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive.
Yeah.
But keep those conversations going.
Definitely.
And until next time, happy friend making.
See you later.
Bye. Okay, so today we're going to look at swimming. We'll be looking at swimming today.
Okay.
Now, we've got some really interesting material here, and you're not going to believe where it comes from.
Where's it from?
It's actually IELTS prep stuff.
IELTS prep.
Yeah, you know those English language tests?
Right, yeah.
But they have these really interesting passages, and it's all about swimming and different attitudes towards swimming and different places to swim around the world.
Interesting.
So we thought we would take a deep dive into that today.
Yeah, I'm game.
Cool. So I guess the best place to start with swimming is, well, do you like swimming?
You know, I wouldn't say I'm a big swimmer. I'm more of a watcher.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to watch swimming. I can appreciate, the skill and athleticism.
Yeah.
But I'm not out there doing laps every day or anything like that.
Okay. Well,
I think that.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy a good swim every now and again.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they talk about here is how hard it is to learn to swim. They've got this anecdote about this one person, and it took them forever to learn. And they finally got it. But it was only after they had some coaching.
Yeah, I think that's probably true for a lot of people. Swimming is not something that comes totally naturally to us. We have this instinct to kind of lift our heads up out of the water, and that kind of throws off your balance. So yeah, having some good instruction can really make a difference.
Yeah. So what do you think then about this whole idea of community swimming pools in China?
Oh, that's interesting.
They seem to be like the main place to swim there.
Right.
Which is really different from what we see in like the US or Australia or the UK for that matter.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense though. If you think about, how it's densely populated, a lot of Chinese cities are, and also, access to natural bodies of water.
Right.
Might be limited in some cases. So community pools kind of make sense as a safe and accessible option.
Yeah, I get that. So I also noticed that they talk a lot about the dangers of swimming in unsupervised areas.
Oh, right.
Things like lakes and rivers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point. Those environments can be really unpredictable. You might have currents that you're not aware of. There could be, obstacles hidden beneath the surface. The depth can change very suddenly.
Right.
And it's not always easy to tell
Yeah.
how deep the water is just by looking at it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the sea, which they say is way less predictable than swimming pools.
Yeah, the sea is a whole other ballgame.
Why is that?
I mean, you've got tides coming in and out. You've got currents that can be really strong. The weather can change really quickly. And there's also, marine life to think about. So yeah, it's just a much more dynamic environment than a controlled pool.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because I never really stopped to think about all the safety features that are built into pools.
Right.
Like having lifeguards.
Yeah.
And having the depth clearly marked and, just that visibility.
Yeah. It's easy to take those things for granted.
Yeah.
But a lot of thought goes into designing a safe pool environment. Everything from the slope of the entry to the non-slip surfaces around the pool. It's all designed to minimize risks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd never really thought about that before.
Yeah.
But it's true. So I guess what we've learned today is that swimming is not just about, jumping in the water.
Right.
There's a lot more to it. There's these cultural influences.
Yeah.
There's the different types of water environments. And then there's the safety aspects as well.
Absolutely.
So it's been a really interesting deep dive. And I think it's made me think about swimming in a whole new way.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting is to think about, how your own access to water, whether it's a community pool or a beach or a lake, how that shapes your relationship with swimming.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, something to ponder.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into swimming. Hope you learned something new. And we'll catch you next time.
Sounds good.
All right, deep divers, are you ready for another deep dive? Today we are going to take a closer look at something I think pretty much all of us can relate to, and that's our mobile phone habits.
Definitely. I think we've all got some thoughts on that topic.
Right. It's inescapable these days. So for today's deep dive, we're going to be looking at excerpts from IELTS Speaking, mobile phone habits. And what's really cool about this one is it focuses on a single person's experiences. And get this, their story starts all the way back in the pre-smartphone era. Back when phones had those little black and white screens.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember those. Tiny screens, physical buttons. That does seem like a world away now.
It really does. kind of hard to imagine life before smartphones now, isn't it?
It is. I mean, just thinking about how much technology has changed even in the last decade, it's kind of mind-blowing.
I know. Okay, so this person starts their story with a phone that only has a black and white screen. Can you even imagine?
Barely. So I guess the first question that comes to mind is, how have mobile phones evolved since those days? What would you say are some of the biggest technological leaps that we've seen?
Well, I think the jump to color screens was a huge one. I mean, suddenly phones became way more visually appealing and engaging. Remember when those first color screen phones came out? It was
Yeah.
like a revolution.
Totally. And right after that, touchscreens. I mean, that really changed everything, didn't it? Suddenly phones were way more interactive and intuitive to use.
Yeah. And then you have the arrival of the internet on phones and then the whole world of apps. It's like everything changed overnight. I mean, the way we use our phones, the things we can do with them. It's just crazy to think about how far we've come.
And you know what's really interesting is that this person we're talking about, they actually rarely use their phone for calls or texting these days.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They're all about video calls and social media. That's interesting. I feel like that's the trend we're seeing more and more these days. What do you think is driving that shift? Why are people moving away from traditional calls and text in favor of things like video calls and social media?
Well, I think part of it is that technology has made it so much easier to connect with people in those ways. I mean, think about it. Video calls used to be kind of clunky and unreliable. Now you can have a crystal clear video chat with someone on the other side of the world without even thinking about it.
Right. And social media platforms are designed to keep us constantly engaged. There's always something new to see, someone to connect with. It's kind of addictive, isn't it?
It really is. But I think it's also about the way we communicate now.
Yeah.
You know, we're so used to sharing our lives online, to posting pictures and videos, to having these instant conversations. So it makes sense that our phone habits would reflect that.
That makes sense. So how do you think this shift has changed the way we communicate? Are these changes ultimately good or bad?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think there are definitely some positives. Video calls, for example, can be a really great way to stay connected with people who live far away. You can see their faces, hear their voices. It feels so much more personal than just a phone call.
Yeah, and social media can be a great way to build community and stay informed about what's going on in the world. But of course, there are downsides too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the big ones that comes to mind is the whole issue of screen time. I mean, let's be real. We're all spending way too much time staring at our phones. It's easy to get sucked into that endless scroll and lose track of time.
Yeah, and then there's the whole comparison game that can happen on social media. You know, constantly seeing everyone else's highlight reels can make it hard to feel good about your own life. And I think it's easy to forget that what we're seeing online isn't always an accurate reflection of reality.
So true. But going back to the person we're discussing, there's another thing I found super interesting. They're committed to upgrading their phone every 3 to 4 years.
Every 3 to 4 years. Wow, that's pretty frequent. I mean, some people hold on to their phones for much longer than that, right?
They do. I think I'm probably one of them. But it does make you think about the psychology behind the upgrade cycle. Why do we feel this pressure to always have the newest phone? Is it purely about the new features, or is there something else going on?
Well, I think there's definitely a psychological component to it. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with advertising that tells us we need the latest and greatest phone, the newest camera, the fastest processor, the sleekest design. It creates this feeling that our current phone is somehow inadequate, even if it's working perfectly fine.
It's like they're trying to make us feel like we're missing out if we don't have the newest model. And then there's the social pressure, too.
Yeah.
This person we were talking about, they mentioned feeling self-conscious because their friends always have the newest gadgets. I think that definitely plays a role for a lot of people.
It's like there's this unspoken expectation to keep up with the Joneses when it comes to technology.
Exactly. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit here. One of the things I really appreciated about this person's story was their honesty about both the positive and negative impacts of mobile phones. They talk about how convenient they are, but also how they can be a major distraction. It really is a double-edged sword.
Totally. I mean, there's no denying that mobile phones have made our lives incredibly convenient. We have access to information at our fingertips, we can connect with anyone in the world instantly, and we're never really bored.
Right. I mean, I can't even imagine going back to a time when I didn't have a smartphone. But at the same time, there's this constant pressure to be on, to respond to messages and notifications immediately, to keep up with everything that's happening online.
Yeah, it can be really overwhelming. And I think it's easy to lose sight of the present moment when we're constantly plugged into our phones. We miss out on real-life interactions, we have trouble focusing on tasks, and it can even interfere with our sleep.
And I think the biggest challenge we face is finding that balance between being connected and taking time to disconnect. It's about setting boundaries for ourselves, being mindful of our usage, and making sure that our phones are serving us, not the other way around.
It's not easy, though. It's something we all struggle with. But I think it's so important to be aware of the potential downsides and to make conscious choices about how we use our phones.
Absolutely. Well, deep divers, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about how mobile phones have evolved from those basic black and white bricks to the multifaceted devices they are today. We've explored how they've changed the way we communicate, how the upgrade cycle plays on both our desire for the latest tech and those social pressures we talked about, and how we all grapple with finding that sweet spot, that balance in our relationship with our phones.
It's been a fascinating discussion. I think it's something we could all probably talk about for hours.
Seriously. But I want to leave you all with a final thought. If you could design the ideal relationship with your mobile phone, what would that look like? How would you maximize those benefits while minimizing the downsides? Something to think about, deep divers. And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
It's great to be back.
Today, we're going to be looking at this idea of evening routines and how they've changed over time.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, so the source material we're working with is actually some excerpts from IELTS Speaking, Evening Time Discussion.
Interesting.
So for those who don't know, IELTS is the International English Language Testing System, and it's used to assess the English language proficiency of people who want to study or work where English is used as the language of communication.
Right.
Anyway, one of the sections of the speaking test focuses on discussing familiar topics like hobbies, daily routines, or in this case, evenings.
I see.
And what we found is this particular discussion provides a really, really interesting perspective on how evenings have evolved, especially with the rise of technology.
Makes sense.
So yeah, we're kind of going to time travel a little bit through this person's life and see how their evenings have changed from childhood to present day.
Sounds like a plan.
And maybe even, you listening out there, you might even find yourself relating to some of these changes and reflecting on your own evening routines.
Absolutely.
So right off the bat, the speaker mentions something that I think a lot of us can relate to.
Okay.
They talk about how they've always thought of themselves as more of a morning person.
Interesting.
Like mornings represent this fresh start full of potential and all that.
Yeah, I get that.
But then they admit that in reality, they're actually more of a night owl.
Uh-huh. Isn't that always the way?
Right? Like I think deep down, we all want to be those morning people who wake up early and seize the day. But then life happens and evenings just kind of become this time where we finally get to unwind and do our own thing.
I think that's a really relatable dilemma.
Absolutely.
So how does this self-proclaimed night owl actually spend their evenings?
Well, it's interesting because they talk about how their evenings have changed drastically over the years.
Oh, how so?
So they start by describing their childhood evenings. And it's a completely different picture from what we're used to today.
I'm intrigued.
Back then, they mostly spent their evenings reading.
Really?
Yeah, apparently there wasn't a whole lot of other entertainment options available at the time.
Huh. So no Netflix, no social media?
Nope, not even much TV.
Yeah.
It seems like reading was their main form of evening entertainment.
Wow, that's quite a contrast to how many people spend their evenings today.
Right. It really makes you appreciate how much technology has influenced the way we live our lives.
Absolutely. And it begs the question, has this shift towards digital entertainment actually enriched our lives or made it more difficult to relax?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's funny because the speaker actually touches on this very point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they talk about how nowadays their evenings are filled with a wider variety of activities, but it doesn't necessarily mean they feel more relaxed.
I see.
For example, they mentioned spending time reading, which is a carryover from their childhood.
Okay.
But they also talk about playing games on their phone and watching short videos online.
Ah, so even though they have more options, they're still drawn to that instant gratification of digital content.
Exactly. And they even admit that sometimes they find themselves just mindlessly scrolling through social media or flipping between different apps.
I think we've all been there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like this constant need to be stimulated, even if it leaves us feeling drained at the end of the day.
It's a real struggle.
And, it gets even more interesting when they start talking about the differences between their weekday and weekend evenings.
Oh, yeah, I'm curious about that. Tell me more.
So on weekdays, they still feel this pressure to catch up on work emails and stuff like that.
Oh, so the workday never really ends.
Pretty much, which means that even their evenings can feel a bit like an extension of their job.
Makes sense.
But then on weekends, it's all about relaxation and entertainment.
So it's like a complete switch.
Exactly. They specifically mentioned spending a lot of time watching TV shows. And you guessed it, short videos.
Ha ha ha, the allure of those short videos.
I know, right? Seems like they're everywhere these days.
They are.
But it does raise an interesting point about how our evenings are structured now.
Go on.
I mean, for a lot of people, weekdays have become so hectic and work-focused that weekends are the only time we really allow ourselves to truly unwind.
I think there's a lot of truth to that.
But even then, our downtime is often dominated by screens and digital content.
It's almost like we've forgotten how to relax without some form of digital stimulation.
It really makes you wonder, right?
It does.
Like, is this constant barrage of information and entertainment actually helping us de-stress? Or is it just a different kind of exhaustion?
It's a question worth pondering.
Absolutely. And, you know, this whole deep dive has really got me thinking about my own evening routines.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I definitely relate to that feeling of being pulled in a million different directions during the week. And then on weekends, just kind of collapsing in front of the TV or scrolling through my phone.
Yeah.
It makes me realize that I need to be more mindful about how I spend my evenings.
That's a good takeaway.
I think it's easy to fall into this trap of just letting technology dictate our downtime.
Right.
But maybe it's time we all start making more conscious choices about how we want to spend those precious evening hours.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, everybody, I think that's about all the time we have for this deep dive.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It really does. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Go ahead.
We've seen how this one person's evenings have transformed over time, largely due to the influence of technology.
Yeah.
And it's clear that technology will continue to shape our lives in ways we can't even imagine yet.
True.
But as we move forward, it's important to ask ourselves, how do we want technology to influence our evenings?
That's a great question.
Do we want to be completely consumed by the digital world, or can we find a way to strike a balance and create evenings that are both fulfilling and truly relaxing?
It's a challenge we all face.
It is, and it's something we should all be thinking about as we head into our own evenings tonight.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Until next time.
Ever get that feeling like, you know, boredom just hits different now than it did when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Like it's just, I don't know.
Different flavor of boredom.
Yeah, totally. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today.
Yeah.
Like, how does this, you know, universal feeling of just being bored change as we go through life?
Right.
So for this deep dive we're looking at, you know, we found this person who is like reflecting on their own experiences with boredom. And I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's so interesting about their perspective is that they used to talk about being bored because they didn't have like goals or like a lack of goals or something.
Right.
But now it seems to be coming from somewhere else completely.
It's such a shift, right?
Huge shift.
And
Yeah.
it makes me think about like summer break as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like those long stretches of time where there was absolutely no structure.
Yeah. That's exactly what they highlight, those long holidays, especially when they were a student. And they really describe them as like just this breeding ground for boredom, which I think a lot of us can probably relate to. Like, remember just having all the time in the world, but no idea how to fill it?
Oh, yeah, 100%. So, like, how did they try to deal with it?
Yeah, how did they cope? Well, they mentioned things like TikTok and video games.
Oh, my gosh, same.
Right, which, like, honestly, even now is, like, my go-to if I'm, like, feeling a little, you know.
Yeah, totally.
But here's where things get really, really interesting.
Okay.
They say even after doing those things, they just end up feeling kind of empty and, get this, even more bored.
Oh, wow.
So it makes you think, are these things that we do to, like, avoid boredom? Are they just, like, a little surface level? Or are they actually making the problem worse?
Yeah, it's like we're just chasing a quick fix.
Totally.
Instead of addressing the root of the problem.
Exactly.
And speaking of like eye-opening observations,
Okay.
they had a really interesting thing to say about adulthood, which was that it's definitely more boring. I'm curious to hear your take on that.
It's a bold statement for sure.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting was the contrast that they drew between like childhood and adulthood.
Okay.
So they were saying in childhood, it was like, you know, you have your toys, you've got your friends, and there's just this constant sense of like wonder and excitement about the world.
Right.
But adulthood, they describe it as being, you know, so bogged down by anxieties and responsibilities and just that feeling of being overwhelmed.
It's almost like the things that we crave as kids, like freedom and independence, become the sources of our boredom as adults.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I know, like when I was younger, I couldn't wait to just have the freedom to do whatever I wanted.
Sure.
But now, like, sometimes all that freedom is just, it feels overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think having so many choices can actually be paralyzing.
Oh, yeah.
And, when you're paralyzed, you don't take action. You kind of just stay stuck. And that sense of aimlessness can really feed into boredom, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So, yeah, it definitely challenges this, like, popular assumption that, childhood is all boredom.
Yeah.
And then adulthood is all, like, business and engagement and, all that.
It definitely flips the script.
It does.
So, like, thinking about all this, what is the big takeaway? Like, what does this deep dive really tell us about boredom?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that boredom can, like, shift and evolve throughout our lives, Sometimes it comes from this lack of direction.
Right.
Sometimes it comes from the overwhelming weight of choices and responsibility.
Yeah.
And, while those quick fix activities might give us a little break,
Yeah.
they don't really address the root cause.
Yeah. And I think that leaves us with a really important question to think about.
Like, what's that?
Like, if boredom really is all about a lack of engagement, how can we design our lives, both in work and in leisure, to, build in a sense of purpose and excitement, regardless of how old we are?
Such a good question.
Because let's face it, like, no one wants to just be going through the motions.
Exactly. And I think it's something we each have to figure out for ourselves, Like, what activities really light us up?
Right.
What goals get us out of bed in the morning?
Right.
Those are the things that are going to help us combat that boredom and live a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, that is such a good point to end on.
Thanks.
And we'd love to know what you think about all of this.
Yeah.
Has your relationship with boredom changed over time?
Yeah.
Let us know.
Share your thoughts.
Until next time, happy diving.
Happy diving.
Bye. All right, everyone. Welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
So this time, we're going to be looking at some excerpts from IELTS speaking, computer usage.
Okay.
And it's basically just one person's, thoughts and experiences with computers, both good and bad, I guess.
Sounds relatable.
Yeah. I mean, who isn't using a computer like every single day at this point?
Right. Exactly.
So I thought it'd be cool to kind of go through some of these and just see what resonates with us and what maybe sparks some interesting conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the things that this person talks about was how they primarily use computers for work, like lesson planning and creating presentations.
Oh, interesting.
Which I think is really interesting because they kind of talk about how it makes them feel always on.
Yeah, always connected.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, especially if you're in a profession where, you're expected to be available.
Especially teachers, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it makes me think about how much technology has changed education in general.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I remember when I was a kid, the computers we had in school were like these huge clunky things.
Right.
We mostly just use them for typing exercises.
Yeah, just the basics.
Nothing like what kids have access to now.
Oh, definitely not.
So it's just crazy to think about how far we've come.
Yeah, for sure.
But speaking of early computer memories, this person actually mentioned that their first experience with computers was playing games in primary school.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, during like IT classes or something.
Makes sense though, right? I mean, it's a fun way to get kids engaged with technology.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
My first computer experience was definitely games as well.
Yeah, me too, actually. I remember playing like, what was that game?
Was it like Oregon Trail or something?
Yes, Oregon Trail. That was it.
Oh, classic.
Oh, man, that game was the best.
I know. Those are the days.
Good times. Good times.
But, it's interesting because later on in the interview, this person talks about how life without computers would be a complete disaster for them.
Oh, yeah, because of work.
Exactly. It's not just about games anymore for them. It's like their livelihood depends on it.
Yeah, it makes you think about all the essential tasks that we rely on computers for now.
Oh, totally. I mean, can you imagine trying to do your job without email or like specific software programs?
No way.
It would be chaos.
And on a larger scale, I mean, think about all the systems that rely on computers, like banking, healthcare, transportation.
Oh my gosh, it would be a complete standstill.
Right. It's like we've become so dependent on technology that we can't even function without it.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, definitely.
But, this actually brings up another point that the interviewee mentioned, which is the difficulty of using a computer without Wi-Fi or electricity.
Oh, right.
Which I think is a really important issue because it highlights the digital divide that exists in our world.
You mean like not everyone has equal access to technology?
Exactly. While some of us might complain about slow internet speeds, there are people who live in areas with limited or no internet infrastructure at all.
Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that.
And then there's the issue of electricity. Like, imagine trying to use a computer during a power outage.
Yeah, that would be tough.
It really makes you appreciate the resources that we often take for granted.
For sure.
And it also underscores the importance of not only digital literacy, but also equitable access to technology for everyone.
Absolutely.
Because without those things, people are being left behind.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Something we need to be talking more about, for sure.
It's crazy to think that something as simple as reliable internet or electricity can have such a huge impact on people's lives.
It really can.
Like you said, it's a privilege that we often don't even realize we have.
Exactly.
So we've gone from reminiscing about childhood computer games to talking about the digital divide.
It's been quite the journey.
And I think it just goes to show how complex our relationship with computers really is.
Absolutely. It's not just about convenience or entertainment anymore. It's about access opportunity and even basic necessities in some cases.
Yeah, well said.
And this all makes me wonder how this is going to evolve even further with the rise of AI and automation.
Oh, that's a good question.
Like, will these advancements help to bridge the digital divide, or will they actually widen it?
I don't know, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah, I think so too.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from personal anecdotes to societal implications, and even touched on the future a bit.
It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
I agree.
And hopefully it's given our listeners some new perspectives on their own relationship with computers.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested in exploring this topic further, we'd encourage you to check out the original source material, which is IELTS Speaking, Computer Usage.
And as always, feel free to share your thoughts and comments with us on social media.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.
Okay, so ready to dive in?
Absolutely, let's do it.
All right, well, today we're looking at what seems to be practice dialogue. Like someone's prepping for, I don't know, like an IELTS interview or something.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but it's fascinating because it gives us this sort of like personal window into someone's experience learning English, as a second language.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, we get to see how they view language skills, like within their own culture, right?
Exactly. And right off the bat, they say, I'm not particularly talented, but then they're like, but if there's one thing I do better than others, it would be speaking English.
Huh. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because it almost suggests that they don't necessarily see fluency in another language as a talent.
Like, it's not on the same level as playing piano or being amazing at sports or something.
Right. And that could be a cultural thing. Because in some cultures, practical skills, especially ones that have, like, global reach, those are way more valuable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, think about places where knowing multiple languages is just part of daily life.
Totally.
For getting a job, navigating the community. I mean, that fluency becomes less of a special talent and more of a tool that you need to get by.
It's like a necessity.
Exactly.
And this person, they've definitely put in the work, like serious effort to learn. They started at 18, spent a decade practicing, and still see themselves as a learner.
Yeah.
I mean, that's impressive.
10 years. Wow. It just goes to show you, language learning is a lifelong journey. It's not like you hit a certain point and then, boom, you're done.
You're always learning.
Always.
Yeah.
Even native speakers are always learning new words, new expressions. And I think this person's attitude, always striving to improve, that really embodies that whole lifelong learning thing. And honestly, it's pretty inspiring.
It really is. And they're not just doing this for fun either. They actually say their English skills directly affect their job as a teacher, like it impacts their income.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that brings up a really important point about the link between language skills and economic empowerment. We know from studies that being bilingual, especially in our globalized world, it can be a huge advantage in the job market.
Yeah, it opens doors.
Big time. Higher salaries, international opportunities even. I mean, it can even impact things like social mobility.
It's powerful stuff. And this person really gets that. Now, another thing that struck me was how they talked about talent versus skill. They say their fluency isn't about some natural ability. It's all about the effort they put in, the time they invested.
It's like they're challenging that whole idea that you either have a gift for languages or you don't. While some people might pick it up more easily, I think this person's experience shows us that dedication and putting in the hours, that can lead to amazing results.
Like practice trumps talent, in a way.
It reminds me of that whole growth mindset idea, believing that your abilities aren't fixed. You can develop them through practice.
So it's not about having this special talent. It's about the work you put in.
Exactly. And it ties back to what we were saying earlier about different cultures valuing different skills. It's like maybe in a culture that really emphasizes hard work and sticking with things, becoming fluent in another language, that might be seen as this testament to your character, to your dedication, not just some lucky break in your genes.
It's about who you are, not just what you were born with.
Right.
Now, something that really stood out to me was when they mentioned being the only English speaker in their family. I wonder, what kind of impact do you think that has?
Well, it definitely raises some questions about family dynamics, right?
Yeah.
Like, how does language shape those relationships? On the one hand, this person could be a bridge between their family and the English-speaking world, translating, explaining cultural stuff, really facilitating communication. I bet that can feel pretty good to be able to help your family like that.
I bet.
But on the other hand, it could also be isolating, like feeling different from your family because you have the skill that they don't.
Feeling like you don't quite fit in.
Exactly. And it makes you think about those language barriers that can pop up even within families, especially in our world today where everything's so interconnected.
Right. That's a really good point. So we've covered a lot, huh? From cultural ideas about language to the importance of dedication and even family dynamics. It's amazing what we can learn from just a little bit of practice dialogue.
It is. And I hope it gets our listeners thinking. Like, if you had the chance, what language would you want to master? And what new possibilities could that open up in your life?
It's a great question to ponder.
I think so, too.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time. All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always fun to jump into these.
Yeah, and today we are tackling something that I think we all use pretty much every day, and yet probably don't give that much thought to.
I know, I don't think about it very often.
But maybe we should be giving it a little bit more thought because mirrors are kind of fascinating when you actually start to unpack
they're really
what they're all about.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to do today. We're diving into mirrors.
Yeah, we got some really interesting personal experiences someone shared with us about their own relationship with mirrors.
Right.
But we're also going to kind of use that as a springboard to reflect on.
I see what you did there.
I know.
Okay.
Couldn't resist.
All right.
But yeah, to reflect on some bigger ideas about mirrors, how they play into our sense of self-image, cultural norms, even interior design.
Yeah, it's funny because when you think about mirrors, it's so easy to just think, oh yeah, it's just for checking your appearance before you head out the door.
Right.
But they really do go so much deeper than that.
They do.
We can get into the psychology of mirrors, the sociology of mirrors, even like the philosophy of mirrors.
I love that.
Like, how do different cultures view reflections? How has the way we use mirrors changed over time? Like, it's a total rabbit hole of really interesting stuff.
I'm so ready to go down this rabbit hole. Let's do it.
Okay, let's jump in.
So the person we heard from this time, they talk about being very aware of their appearances, especially, before virtual meetings.
Sure.
Like, that got to look good on camera. We've all been there.
Especially, I think, over the last couple of years, that's become much more of a common experience for everyone.
Absolutely. So, it's relatable, but it also, I think, brings up a bigger point about how mirrors really do kind of shape how we see ourselves, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. They play a huge role in our self-perception. And it's not just about, like you said, that quick glance before you head out the door. You look at studies on things like body dysmorphia, and you see how mirrors can sometimes really distort people's self-image, lead to a lot of anxieties about appearance.
It's true.
And it's interesting, too, to think about how that ideal reflected image has changed over time.
Yes.
Like reflecting societal beauty standards of different eras.
Oh, for sure, like corsets and
yeah, exactly.
those tiny waists and
Totally. And then you look at the rise of social media and selfie culture, and I think that's really kind of amplified this whole thing with the mirror.
Yeah, it's like this constant, self-documentation and comparison.
It's a whole other layer, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of which, this person we heard from, they mentioned being really mirror obsessed as a teenager, like constantly checking their reflection, even carrying a mirror around everywhere they went.
Okay, so that's, pretty classic mirror stage behavior. Yeah, it's this really interesting concept from psychology. Essentially, it's this phase, particularly during adolescence, where we become super self-aware and we use the mirror to kind of try to solidify our sense of self, like, who am I?
Okay.
How do I look to others? What's my image?
So basically that teenage mirror obsession, it's all about figuring out who you are.
Exactly. It's a really crucial part of development, and I think a lot of people can relate to that experience of being, hyper-focused on their appearance during those years.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, who wasn't awkward and, self-conscious in middle school and high school?
Exactly.
Like a rite of passage.
Right, but here's the thing.
Right.
The mirror stage doesn't just disappear once we reach adulthood.
Wait, really? So you're saying we're always in some version of that self-defining phase?
Exactly. It evolves. Of course, it becomes more nuanced.
Okay.
But think about it, how often do we still check ourselves out in the mirror before a big presentation or a first date?
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
I guess.
We're still trying to project a certain image.
Okay.
Manage how we're perceived.
That makes sense. And even like, what we wear, how we dress.
Right.
That affects how we feel about ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. There's actually a term for this called enclothed cognition.
Enclothed cognition.
Yeah, it's this idea that seeing ourselves in the mirror dressed a certain way can actually influence our behavior, our confidence, even our performance.
Wow. I never thought about it like that. That's
right?
Kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
So, okay, back to the person we heard from.
Yeah.
They mentioned kind of this transition from carrying around a pocket mirror to just using their phone camera now.
Right.
To do those appearance checks. And they even pointed out, being a guy is kind of a factor in that. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a great point because it really speaks to some of the societal expectations around mirrors. Historically, they've been marketed much more towards women, tied to this whole idea of beauty and self-care routines. But that is definitely changing.
It is.
Think about how many men's fashion magazines there are now, how much emphasis there is on skincare and grooming for men.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just women's territory anymore.
Exactly.
But it does make you think about whether there's still kind of a gender divide in how people use mirrors, or maybe it's less about the tool itself.
Right.
And more about, those underlying pressures to conform to certain looks.
Absolutely. It's not just about vanity. It's about fitting into societal norms, what's considered acceptable, attractive, even professional for men versus women.
So true. Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit. This person we heard from, they're also a huge fan of using mirrors as decor.
Oh, yeah.
Mainly to make spaces feel larger.
And they're brilliant for that.
They are.
It's not just about aesthetics, though.
Right.
Mirrors strategically placed, they can create this illusion of depth and expansiveness, totally transform how you perceive a room's dimensions. It's like you're playing with light and perception.
That's like functional art.
It really is.
And they can really brighten up a space, too.
Oh, absolutely.
I have this huge mirror in my living room.
Okay.
And honestly, it makes the whole place feel so much more airy and welcoming.
I can see that.
It really does.
They add a touch of elegance, too, don't they?
Mm.
It's fascinating to me how mirrors, they have this really practical purpose, but they also tap into our sense of self and how we present ourselves to the world.
It's so true. It's like this weird duality, right?
Totally.
So we've gone from self-image to societal norms to interior design, and it all started with this simple mirror.
It really goes to show you that even everyday objects, the things we take for granted,
right,
they can have these hidden layers of meaning. They influence us in ways we don't even realize.
Yeah, and I think this whole deep dive, it kind of makes me wonder if mirrors could actually talk.
Okay.
Like, what stories would they tell about us?
That's a great question.
What would they reveal about our anxieties, our aspirations, even, our deepest selves?
Something to think about. Definitely.
That's something to think about.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, everybody, until next time.
See ya.
Happy reflecting. Hey, everyone. Welcome back for another deep dive. I was finding these so interesting, and today we're looking at something something pretty cool, actually. It's all about old buildings.
Old buildings, all right.
Yeah, and you know how we always use some kind of source material to get us going? Well, this time it's actually from an IELTS speaking exercise.
Oh, wow. IELTS. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, it's designed to get people talking. And this one is all about someone's personal experiences with old buildings, which I thought was a really interesting angle.
Yeah, definitely personal experiences can totally shape how you see these structures. I mean, just thinking about it myself, I've been to some pretty amazing old places, and you feel a sense of awe,
Oh, absolutely. You're right. Like standing there and imagining all the history that happened right in that spot. It's incredible.
Exactly. And this source mentions visiting these old places in China where famous people from history actually lived.
Oh, wow. In China. That's amazing. I'd love to see those. Have you ever had an experience like that? Like where you felt that connection to the past in an old building?
Let me think. Well, I once visited this castle in England. It was hundreds of years old, and I swear you could almost hear the echoes of, knights and all that.
Oh, that's so cool. It's like stepping back in time.
It really is, and it makes you realize that these buildings are more than just bricks and mortar, right? They're like living records of the past.
Totally. And that brings up something else from the source that I thought was interesting. They talk about how not every old building is worth saving,
Right, that's a tough one.
Yeah, they make this distinction between buildings with like real historical significance versus ones that are maybe dangerous or just too far gone to fix.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like you can't save everything, and then there's the question of how you decide, which ones are the most important to preserve.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just about history, it's about money and sometimes even politics.
Oh, for sure. Like, think about it, restoring a really old building that's falling apart. It can cost a fortune.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
And then there's the whole debate about how much you should modernize it. Do you try to make it exactly like it was originally, even if that means, no modern plumbing or electricity?
Or do you like update it to make it more functional, but maybe lose some of that historical authenticity in the process?
Exactly. It's a tough balancing act, for sure.
No kidding. Well, speaking of tough choices, our source actually says that they prefer living in modern houses.
Really? Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and, I can kind of see where they're coming from. I mean, who wouldn't love a nice swimming pool or a home gym, right?
So, true modern comforts are hard to beat, but doesn't that kind of clash with the idea of preserving old buildings?
Right. That's what I was thinking. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it possible to appreciate both?
Well, I think it's all about finding that balance. There's this growing trend called adaptive reuse, where they take old buildings and give them new purposes, but in a way that respects the history.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that, like turning an old factory into an art space or something.
Exactly. It's like you get the best of both worlds, the charm and character of the old building, but with modern functionality.
That's really cool. I like that a lot.
Hmm?
Okay, so back to our source for a second, because there's one more thing I wanted to touch on. They talk about how they're really drawn to buildings that were connected to famous people from history.
Mm-hmm.
Like they want to get a glimpse into how those people lived.
I get that. I feel the same way. It's like you're trying to connect with them on a personal level almost,
Exactly. And it makes me think about how architecture itself can tell us so much about different time periods. It's like a reflection of the values and the technologies and everything else that was going on at the time.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a time capsule almost.
Yeah.
Like take medieval castles, for example. Those weren't just for defense. They were all about projecting power and status.
Wow, yeah. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, the high walls, the towers, the fact that they had tiny windows. It all tells us something about how people lived back then and what was important to them.
That's a great point. So basically, we value old buildings for all sorts of reasons. Right? Their historical significance, the way they look, the stories they tell, and even how we can repurpose them for today.
Exactly. And like we were saying before, figuring out how to preserve them is this ongoing conversation with so many different factors to consider.
It really is. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, so I want to leave everyone with something to think about. If you could visit any old building in the world, which one would it be? And why I think your answer might reveal something interesting about how you connect with history.
That's a great question to ponder. And, while you're thinking about it, I'd encourage everyone to take a look around your own community. You might be surprised by the history hiding in plain sight.
So true. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us and keep exploring.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so have you ever lost something super important? Like your keys or your phone? Maybe even your sanity during a move.
Oh, yeah.
I think we've all been there, right? But what about when you're on the other side of that? What about when you find something that somebody else has lost? Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the world of lost and found.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at personal experiences and best practices, and for this deep dive, we're drawing our insights from a piece called IELTS Speaking, Lost and Found.
That's good.
So, no worries. We're not going to give you an English exam here, but this piece is really insightful. We're going to uncover some actually surprisingly common items that people lose. And, you'll hear from our expert about some tips on increasing your chances of actually getting your lost items back.
Right.
And you might even learn a thing or two about yourself in the process.
Interesting.
So in this IELTS piece, the first thing they talk about is what you do when you find something, right? You've stumbled across something, and their go-to plan that they talk about in the piece is lost and found boxes, or, going to the police if you find something super valuable.
Yeah.
So from your point of view, does this align with, the standard advice? Or are there other better strategies out there?
Well, I think it's a good starting point, but, how often do people actually think about, oh, I'm going to go to the lost and found when they find something? It seems like almost like a mythical place.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I feel like a lot of those boxes are probably just overflowing, and then you lose things in the lost and found.
Yeah, I'm super guilty of just assuming anything in lost and found is gone forever.
Right.
So what are some strategies that actually work?
Well, I think it really depends on the context of the situation. So let's say you find a student ID card in a lecture hall.
Okay.
It probably makes more sense to try to leave a note with your contact information, because it's pretty easy to track that student down, as opposed to putting it in a generic lost and found box.
Right.
Let's say you find a phone. Maybe there's some emergency contact information in there.
Okay.
Or you can look at the recent call list and try to call somebody and figure out who that phone belongs to.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I think for anything truly valuable, I think going to the police is always the kind of safest,
Yeah, definitely.
wisest move.
So this brings us to the more personal side of this topic, our own experiences with losing things.
Yeah.
And I remember one time, very distinctly, I left my entire backpack on the train.
Oh, no.
It had my laptop, it had my wallet, everything was in there. And I was just convinced I'd never see it again.
Wow.
And so, listener, I'd love to hear from you. What's the most memorable thing you've ever lost? What emotions kind of flooded in when you realized that it was gone? So this IELTS piece also says that keys, phones, and wallets are kind of the top contenders for the most commonly lost items.
Makes sense.
Which makes sense, right? They're essential for our daily lives.
Yeah.
But is it just that we're absent-minded?
Yeah.
Or is there something deeper going on here?
Yeah. I mean, I think about how much information our brains are processing constantly every day.
Well, yeah.
And I think we're constantly multitasking, maybe we're stressed, our attention is kind of fractured, and I think it's no wonder that we misplace, small everyday objects.
Right.
But I don't think it's only distraction. I think there's actually a really interesting psychological component here as well.
Okay.
Because researchers have found that the more emotionally attached we are to an object, the more likely we are to lose it. It's almost like subconsciously we're kind of afraid of losing something, and then that actually manifests in us losing the thing.
It's like, you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by being so worried about losing something.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is what, we're lucky enough to live in a digitally connected world. And this IELTS piece touches upon this too, the power of social media for finding lost items. They actually talk about a story where somebody found some keys because of a Facebook post. And it really highlights that sense of relief that you feel when something comes back to you that you thought was gone forever.
Yeah.
So how can people use social media effectively in these types of situations?
Well, I think it comes down to using the right platform.
Okay.
So local Facebook groups can be really helpful. Neighborhood apps like Nextdoor, even Twitter, can be surprisingly effective in these cases.
Right.
But I think when you're posting, clarity is key. You want to make sure you have a clear, concise description of the item, the location, and you want to give people multiple ways to contact you.
Right.
And visuals are really your best friend here.
Okay.
I think if you have a picture of the item or maybe even a map of the area where you lost it, that can make all the difference.
So what have we learned in this deep dive into the world of lost and found? Well, number one, I think, is that when you find something, maybe don't just immediately toss it into the lost and found. Maybe consider the context of the situation.
Right.
Can you leave a note? Can you do a little bit of digital sleuthing and trying to get that item back to the owner more quickly?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is remember that losing things is something that we all do. It's a universal experience. And oftentimes it's driven by, just being distracted or being really busy, but also, surprisingly, our own emotional attachments. And then lastly, embrace the digital age. Social media is a really powerful tool for getting lost things back.
Absolutely.
So, listener, here's a final thought for you to ponder. We've kind of focused here on the practicalities of losing things, but what about the emotional impact of losing something truly meaningful?
Right.
How do we deal with that sense of loss? And what can those experiences teach us about ourselves and about what we value and about the things we truly cherish?
Interesting question.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, this was fun.
See you next time.
See ya.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at something that I think a lot of people might find a little surprising.
Yeah.
And it has to do with email, and specifically how it's used in China. So we've got some excerpts here from an interview talking about this very thing. And I think it'll be interesting to see how things work a little differently over there.
Yeah. I think a lot of people probably just assume that email is this universal thing.
Right.
It's like if you're online, you're using email, but
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be the case.
It sounds like email is not really like ingrained into the culture and the daily lives of folks in China.
Yeah.
Maybe the way it is for other countries. So
Right.
I'm really curious to kind of dive into that and see what's going on.
Well, and I think that the big thing is that there's this app that most people have probably heard of called WeChat.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And it's huge over there.
Okay.
And it's much more than just an email app. It's like,
Right.
you can message your friends with it. You can pay your bills with it. I think you can even like order groceries and stuff
Ooh, wow.
through WeChat. So it's a lot more integrated into
It's like a whole
daily lives.
digital life.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
So email is kind of like just this thing over there that you use for really specific purposes. Like,
yeah, like more formal.
like our source said, job hunting or like business
Right.
contracts and stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like they only use it when they really have to.
Right.
And so I guess the question is like, what makes WeChat so much more appealing than email over there?
Well, I mean, it's definitely faster.
Okay.
I mean, that's got to be part of it, right? It's
Right.
like you send a message and you get a response like right away. And email, it's like,
You're waiting.
you send it off and you're kind of just like, oh, hopefully they see it.
Right. Yeah, you just don't know when you're going to hear back.
Yeah.
Could be an hour,
Here-
could be a week. And things move so fast these days,
Right.
especially in a place like China.
Yeah.
So it's got to be, you got to be able to keep up with the pace of things
Right.
over there.
And there's just not like a big email culture in China, it sounds like.
Oh, interesting.
Like it just never really.
That's kind of what they were saying in the interview.
Yeah.
Like it's just not
Yeah.
the primary mode of communication, so it hasn't really
No.
developed in the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's not the main way that people are communicating, I would think that there are still cases where email is just a better option, right? Like,
Okay.
if it's something sensitive or if you need like a record of
Oh, yeah.
the communicate, like a paper trail.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, there are certain situations where you might want to default the email, even in China.
Right.
But yeah, I think that the point that our source was making is that it's just not something that people really think about as much.
Okay. It's just not the go-to. It's so fascinating to think about. Like how our whole approach to communication
Yeah.
is shaped by, what technology we're using.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you grew up in a world where WeChat was the main way you were talking to everybody, would you even miss email?
I don't know.
You know?
It's a good question.
It makes me wonder, like, as technology keeps changing, are we going to see other countries kind of follow that same path
Right.
where email becomes less and less important? Or will there always be this kind of
Divide.
between, China and other countries?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
interesting to think about that in terms of like the whole work-life balance thing too.
Oh, right.
Because I think in a lot of countries, email is still seen as like the way to communicate for work,
Okay.
and it's
Let's
kind of helps you separate your personal life from your work life.
Oh, yeah.
And so if, WeChat became like the dominant platform everywhere,
Yeah.
I think that could really blur the lines
Yeah.
between those two worlds.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So it sounds like email is playing a much smaller role in China than it is in a lot of other places.
Yeah.
And it's largely because of this app, WeChat, and just the different cultural norms around communication.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy to think about how much we just kind of take for granted about the ways that we
Yeah.
communicate with each other, you know?
It's just kind of like what we're used to.
Yeah, I never really stopped to think about how different it could be in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
But it's making me think about like what's going to happen in the future as technology continues to evolve.
Yeah.
Are we going to see email just completely disappear
Right.
globally, or will it always have a place?
I mean, that's a good question for everybody listening to think about.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think the future of email is going to look like?
Yeah, and how do you think your own communication habits are going to change in the next few years?
Yeah, good stuff. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.